Hey, Roger.
There you go.
All right, that's better. Welcome, everybody, to the third meeting of the CSRIC, the Communication Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council. You're here at a great time of the year, so I hope you have some time to look around. You're also here for a big event today. We have a lot of things to do today. This will be our longest meeting, maybe of the whole cycle. And what we've done for the agenda, and the agenda's before you, is to group the cybersecurity reports in the morning, and then we'll have a break. We'll break the meeting for a short time to do a presentation about those reports, and then we'll take lunch, which is first since I've been doing this. We'll take lunch and come back and close or complete the meeting in the afternoon, and we'll have the rest of the reports in the afternoon as the agenda shows. So and we do have a lot to do. I do welcome you all here, and I'm glad you're here. So I'll turn this over now to Glenn Post, the chair of CSRIC.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to welcome everyone here today as well, and appreciate you coming inside. A beautiful day with the cherry blossoms blooming here in D.C. and being in here for this meeting. And it will be, as Jeff said, one of the longer meetings we will have in the course of this work we're doing. We do have a very full schedule with 6 working groups reports being presented and voted on, as well as the remaining 4 work groups will provide status reports. There has been an amazing amount of work done by these groups. I want to express my appreciation, just an enormous amount of work over the last few months in these areas, and some very important topics, including prioritization of next generation 9/11 standard gaps, outdoor location accuracy testing criteria, domain name system, security extension, implementation practices, among others that are very important to the work here, but also to this country and the security of this country long term. So these are very important issues we're dealing with, and thank each of you for the hard work and commitment to helping with these very important projects. Before we jump into the reports, I'll turn the meeting over to Jamie Barnett, who is Bureau Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Jamie?
Glenn, thank you, and thank you for being here. It's great to see you again. I'll keep my remarks very, very short because there's a lot to do today. But as you come in and sit again, I'm reminded about the expertise that we have around this table and the expertise that we've had on these working groups. Glenn, let me say to you, at this point, you're even this point. I mean, we've got a lot more work to do after today. But it's been so productive, and I appreciate your leadership on this and gravitas that you brought to it, as well that of your team of Melissa Newman and Stacy Hart and all the others. I'm very excited to and I look forward to the reports this afternoon, Next Generation 911, the E911 location accuracy, and alerting issues that really are associated with the common alerting protocol. I'm also excited about the work that is going to be presented this morning on cyber, which I think will have national effect and really perhaps even international influence. Many people have a part in this. I appreciate the hard work that's gone into it. And the multi-stakeholder approach, many people from different fields, including the government. I appreciated the help from the Department of Homeland Security with Mark Weatherford and Bruce McConnell and Bobby Stempley over there, Dr. Pete Fonash and Dr. Brian Doan. We also appreciate the work from our folks from NIST. I think John Boyens is sitting in this morning for Donna Dodson, who will be here later on, but Ari Schwartz, the Department of Commerce, and as well as many others. Certainly our heads, Michael O'Riordan, Steve Crocker, Professor Jen Rexford, and Dr. Andy Ogielski have done great work on shepherding this through. We have several guests here today that I'm excited about having here. John Curran of AARON, the American Registry of Internet Numbers, Melissa Hathaway and her sons Alexander and Justin, and Dr. John Savage. And I also appreciate the help and personal advice of Jim Lewis of CSIS. And without a doubt, I have to say that I appreciate the folks that work here with me, Jeff Goldthorpe and his team, all the folks in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau and across the FCC for bringing this together. And without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Glenn Post, and thank you again.
Thank you, Jamie. And as we move into the working group presentations, as I mentioned earlier, we have 6 working groups. We review their final reports and recommendations. And following each presentation, the council will vote on the report. So all 6 of those working groups, we will be voting on those reports. Working Group 5 with DNSSEC, the implementation, Steve Crocker will lead that discussion. We have Working Group 6, Secure Routing Protocols, Andy Ogilski, Jennifer Rexford will lead that. Also John Curran, CEO of Aaron, will be participating in that discussion as well. Working Group 7, the botnet remediation, Michael Reardon and Donna Dobson with NIST. She's representative to the council from NIST. We appreciate her being here as well and look forward to that report. So those are the first 3 reports, and at this time we'll turn the program over to Working Group 6.
5.
I'm sorry, 5. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to chair this group. This is marked as final report, but I think it's final report for phase 1 here, and we have more work to do. There we go. The slides are up. So the focus of this working group is DNSSEC implementation practices for ISPs. And DNSSEC is the extension to the DNS protocol, that's the Domain Name System Protocol, to add a very strong layer of security on top of the basic design. And that layer of security is intended to provide authentication of the information. There's no sense of confidentiality or hiding anything. This is just to make sure that when the systems that you use look up domain names, translate those into IP addresses, that the answers they get back have not been tampered with from the time that they were created back at the authoritative source. Can I have the next slide? So the protections are protection against cache poisoning. It adds security, increasingly resonates with customers. These are the opportunities that for DNSSEC. It can be a market differentiator for early adopters, and it may help ISPs avoid some costs if cache poisoning attacks occur. It also provides a platform. This is very important, and one of the emergent properties of DNSSEC. It provides a platform for building other kinds of secure applications on top, it is not, although it wasn't the original intention, it is actually a alternate and lightweight approach to having a kind of public key infrastructure, and holds out the hope of a more unified system for these other applications. So those are the opportunities. Next slide. So our objective was to recommend the best practices for deploying and managing the DNSSEC extensions, DNSSEC for ISPs, for Internet Service Providers, and to recommend proper metrics and measurements that allow for evaluation of the effectiveness. This latter recommendation, latter objective, I should say, is part of the future work that we'll do. And so the focus of what we're here today is the first objective. Next slide, please. Thank you. There's a number of challenges. This is not as straightforward. I've listed several challenges there, but perhaps a way of looking at them as a package is that the domain name system has been operating for quite a long time, a quarter century or more, and is embedded deeply into every aspect of the Internet. There are literally hundreds of thousands or millions of separate implementations of DNSSEC that are, or deployments of DNS that are operating around the world. Networks at every level. Inside of a typical laptop, there may be 3 or 4 separate domain name system resolvers embedded in different parts in the operating system, in the mail system, in the browsers. So trying to make a change to that system is a non-trivial problem, even if the concept is relatively easy. So there's a number of challenges, as I said. and a lot of them are simply growing pains or birth pains of trying to put a new capability in place. And the fundamental requirement is that there's two sides to the system. One is the signing side, where signatures are added to the information in the databases, and the other is the checking or validation side, where the signatures are checked upon receipt of the information. And in order to have effective use of the system, both sides have to be implemented. There has to be all of the entries in the domain name system have to be signed, and all of the lookups have to be checked. And one doesn't get to words like all in an overnight way. So there's an incremental signing process in which the top of the domain name system has been signed. Now that's the root. And then the next layer down, the top-level domains. The major top-level domains, I'm pleased to say, have all been signed, and more are coming. And then we have to move into the enterprises, and that's where we're at a much earlier stage there. It's begun. I'm pleased to say that my colleague and friend here, Bill Smith from PayPal, is a member of one of the leading lights of enterprises that have signed their domain names. And then on the checking side, the validation, there's equally a incremental deployment process. Comcast is probably the poster child in the U.S. for a major ISP that has put validation in place. Inevitably, there are some operational issues that come into play. A key one from the ISP's point of view is when things don't work, even if it's not their fault, they're the ones that get the trouble call and have to pay the cost of that. Another maybe unexpected aspect is that there's been a source of revenue for some ISPs for redirecting lookups that are fundamentally misspelling. So if you type in a domain name and it isn't what you intended, you may well get back a message that says, you've typed a name that doesn't exist. Can we sell you that name? That is not in accordance with the way the domain name system protocol was set up, and DNSSEC makes it either hard or impossible to continue those kind of practices. So there's some policy issues that have to be faced there. And I mentioned Comcast. So they actually were in that position and had to face that problem and made the decision, which I and many of the people that I've been working with applaud greatly. But we recognize that they had to make that from a business perspective, that it wasn't a straightforward, simple decision. So several of those kinds of problems, all of which, from our point of view, are not showstoppers, can be overcome, and it's kind of working up the maturity curve. Next slide. So yet more challenges listed here. This is not a moneymaker directly. You can't deploy DNSSEC, despite what I said on the couple of slides ago that it could be a market differentiator. That's possible, but it's not as direct and as easily measurable and as compelling usually to marketing departments. And of course, it increases operating costs. We think not by very much, but that's one of the hurdles to get over. Let me move on to the next slide. So we have some recommendations. This is a build slide. The first recommendation is that ISPs should, in fact, implement DNSSEC in their recursive resolvers as rapidly as possible. There are degrees of implementation. The highest level would be to actually do the validation. The next level below that is to implement DNSSEC-aware resolvers so that if validation is requested by the end system, that the capability is provided by the ISP to support that. And that's where we have settled for this round as our primary recommendation. The working group was split more or less in half as to whether to go for the higher level or not, but we were uniform that we should at least reach the second level where the capability to support DNSSEC validation by end systems has to be there. And that is a very good staging point for which makes it easy to turn on full-scale validation. There are, in practice, we did a not very comprehensive but quick survey, and we discovered that some of the ISPs are already at that level, some are not, and the force of this recommendation, if adopted, would be to move the industry more uniformly up to that second level and provide an easy access to get up to the top level. Next bullet there. We also want to suggest that key industry segments, banking, credit card, healthcare, and others, provide impetus for validation by signing their zones. So this is a chicken and egg situation in which at the starting point, there's no motivation to sign your zones because nobody's checking. There's no motivation to check because there's no signed zones, and we want to break that cycle. The cycle actually is well underway with the signing of the top-level domains, the signing of the root, and the signing of leading enterprises. We want to move that further forward so that it begins to develop some speed. And so this second recommendation is focused on those industry segments that can reasonably be expected to take a proactive position with respect to security in general and DNSSEC in particular. We also want, in our third recommendation, that software developers, particularly those creating operating systems, web browsers, and the like, incorporate DNSSEC into the validation, DNSSEC validation into the browsers. Sorry, let me get my words right. Into the resolvers that they have built into their components. Next. And we lay out some of the best practices for deployment that are sort of specific guidance to operators. And this isn't intended to be completely comprehensive. This is the wrong kind of report to get into fine-grained detail, but lays out some basic ideas, which would then be backed up by documents that either each operator would create for themselves or that might emerge in other forms of publications. Next slide, please. So the basic idea here is that ISP support for DNSSEC is necessary even for a future in which the endpoints do their own validation. And they must be able to, as it says, at a minimum, recognize DNSSEC-related traffic and allow it to pass through for smooth functioning of an end-to-end DNSSEC secured system. That's the essence of it. The working group was very, very active, and some of the discussions were quite vigorous. It was a lot of knowledge has been brought into this from both security experts and ISPs, and I was actually quite grateful for the opportunity to be involved, and I'm looking forward to the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We'll open the floor for discussion of this report.
I guess before you do that, let me add, these slides did not include, but had intended to, that we received comments and questions and suggestions from 3 members of the council. Craig Spietzel, is that right? From UMA. Oh, you moved. I had you. Hi there. And from Lori Flaherty. We incorporated a couple of the suggestions. We felt that some of the suggestions were actually covered within what we had written, and for some of the others, our feeling was that they were very pointed, very helpful, but given where we were in the preparation of the report and the progress of the working group, that the right thing to do was to fold those into the very next phase that we're going to do. So let me express appreciation for your comments. We took them all seriously. Time was very short, as you know. The deadline for receiving the comments was Monday, and so that was kind of tight. But we will be back in touch, and we will sort of prosecute your comments, if you will, each and every one of them. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Steve. And can we reset the clock for discussion? Thank you.
Hi, this is Bill Smith with PayPal. I just wanted to speak in favor of this the recommendation report. As Steve mentioned, PayPal has implemented DNSSEC, and we appreciate the comments about being perhaps a leading light here, but there are others that are doing it. We recommend that people begin doing it. If you haven't done it yet, you will find a number of between small and medium-sized issues. Andy Ellis from Akamai is sitting across from us, and we've been working with Akamai. As Steve pointed out, there may be some things that need to happen for content distribution networks, but those things will be resolved. You may not know, though, that as an example, PayPal has between 1 and 10,000 domain names. They sort of accrete to us at times through acquisitions or other things, and so signing a domain name, while trivial, when you're signing 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, becomes an operational concern, and it's something we take very seriously. One of the issues I'll say is that we are encountering sort of the manual nature of doing some of these operations, and that will need to be automated over time. For us, we're actually, in order to make sure we can continue to sign our domains properly, we will be doing some processes probably 3 to 4 times a year on each of those between 1 and 10,000 names, just so that we remember how to do it. Okay, because the last thing you want is to have DNSSEC fail, and then you have no one in your operation who knows how to correct the problem. Okay, so I also was encouraged by the comments regarding other industries, and I hope that those of us here and others will take some of the recommendations here to different industry groups. I think it's very important that the ISPs do this, but it's equally essential that we go to financial, healthcare, and other places to get the ball moving. Because as Steve mentioned, we need basically all to do this in order for it to be successful, or a significant portion. And we're a long way from that, but it's a great thing that we're moving forward. So I'm very encouraged by the report, and I speak in favor of it.
Andy Ellis from Akamai. I'm also very encouraged by the report, even with being called out as one of the challenges. Although I know we've already implemented DNSSEC for parts of our infrastructure. It's merely working through an infrastructure that actually includes more resource records than the Internet has IP space, which makes it a very interesting challenge. So we're very pleased by the report. Actually, I'm strongly in favor of where the working group chose to draw the line of having ISPs be DNSSEC aware rather than being DNSSEC verifiers, both because it gets us closer to our end goal, which is having clients be doing DNSSEC verification. I believe if the ISPs are doing the verification, we won't see a push for clients to do it. And especially in light of some of the recent attack scenarios against resolvers doing DNSSEC, I suspect ISPs may be a little reluctant to do verification of DNSSEC records. But again, I think this was some great work, great recommendations that I think are very actionable for all of the entities that these are being suggested to.
Yeah, thank you. Susan Miller with Addis. Just a question. I note the reference to reach out to other vertical markets that should employ DNSSEC. Has there been some consideration on how this recommendation gets to those industry segments or those markets?
At least in part, yes. My understanding of the role of this working group is the focus is on ISPs, and so there's no direct thing. However, there's through the good offices of the council and the commission, considerable amount of publicity that comes from this. Separately, I've been involved in trying to push DNSSEC deployment for some time. Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate has been funding exactly an effort like that, and we're one of the beneficiaries. So this is part of a broader effort from my perspective of trying to get the word out, and we look for ways to target industry segments. In the past, there was quite a bit of effort to get the root signed, quite a bit of effort to get top-level domains signed, and been working in the international arena to do that. And that's been pretty successful. And I don't want to cast this as if our efforts alone have been doing it. It's a worldwide effort with lots of players. We are beginning to engage with very specific industry segments. I found myself in settings that I would never have dreamed of, giving talks to trademark lawyers and explaining why this is important and not getting thrown out of the room, which surprised me even more. And so, yes, going around trying to hit industry segments and work on this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike O'Riordan, Chairman of the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group, and I'd like to speak in support of this work. I mean, it's very important from the point of view of the suppression of abuse on the Internet, be it sort of spam, malware, and what have you, that we can rely on the domain name system. So I very heartily commend this report to the Council.
Thank you.
At SANS, we teach about 23,000 people a year, and it's very challenging to show security people that something matters. And I think what Steve Crocker and his group has done, on top of what Doug Mon at DHS has done, to make this an imperative, a kind of it's not something you should consider. It's something that needs to be done. It needs to be done now. I think CISRIC backing this recommendation is a really important step to help the world know this is something we all ought to do. And it helps the teachers to explain to other people why they ought to do it. So it's a very helpful thing that CISRIC gets on top of this and makes it happen.
Thank you, Alan. I agree with that. That's great.
Craig Spiesel, Online Trust Alliance. Again, we want to, as an organization, we definitely support this. It seems only a year ago the root was signed by VeriSign for .com, so a lot's come forward over this time. I do also want to just echo the point that it is an ecosystem solution, so while ISPs are first step, not only other vertical markets such as banking and e-commerce, but other key players such as hosters and others that are provided, so we have a full end-to-end area of protection. One of the challenges a lot of people are looking at what are the threats today, and I think one of the most important parts is it's helping protect against threats in the future. So again, we're very much in support of this, and thank you for your work, Steve.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? If not, I think Steve's made a motion that we adopt the report and plan, and we have a second for this. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? How about the folks on the phone? Are you in favor?
I approve.
Approved. Elise Kim, I move that we accept the report.
Phil Stagel, Mayor City Chiefs, I move that we accept.
This is Cox, we accept. Approve.
Barry Graham,
Councilman Trotto, we approve.
Anyone else? The folks that I'm aware on the phone and here in the room, the vote is unanimous to approve. And thank you, Steve, again, and all those involved in this committee and the work that's been done here. This is very important work, and I think an important step for cybersecurity. So thank you very much. With that, we will go to Group 6 this time with Andy and Jennifer and John. So I'll turn it over to you all for your report. Secure routing protocols.
Thank you. So I'm Jen Rexford from Princeton University, and my co-chair Andy Gleeski is here as well. We're going to talk about secure interdomain routing. So the 40,000 or so separately administered networks that make up the Internet are stitched together by the interdomain routing system, and in particular the Border Gateway Protocol. So it's essentially the glue that holds the disparate parts of the Internet together, and so its security is really important. But like many of the protocols underlying the Internet, it was designed based on the assumption of trust that the information propagated in it is accurate. And in recent years, there have been a number of high-profile incidents that show that trust is really no longer warranted. So if you go to the next slide. So the scope of our working group is to look at ways to ensure the improved security of the routing system, and in particular to focus on ways that we can encourage the incremental deployment of security technologies. So the group's scope is not to design those technologies, but more to focus on phased deployment of those technologies in the Internet. Although our mission, as you can see in the second paragraph, focuses on Internet service providers, we just want to stress that what we're talking about really affects all the stakeholders that are involved in operating the Internet. So it includes content providers, for example, and enterprises as well as ISPs. If you go on to the next slide, this is our working group. We have a really great mix of vendors, from the main router vendors as well as Internet service providers, the operators of some of the major networks in the U.S., as well as a number of people involved in the standardization of interdomain security solutions. In particular, a group sponsored by Doug Mon at DHS has done a lot of great work on designing standards and making forward progress towards being able to certify the information that goes in the Border Gateway Protocol. So if you move on to the next slide, basically, I just want to stress again that the functioning of the Internet routing system is crucial. The Internet doesn't work. The Internet is the routing system. So a really important goal for us is to make sure that whatever we do no harm. And so I'll come back to that point over and over again in the recommendations. So the Border Gateway Protocol itself is quite simple. It's just a protocol that allows different domains to disseminate information from their neighbors about which paths they want to use. And it's constructing paths in a hop-by-hop fashion without any global authority. And that's very important, and it's a big part of why BGP works so well and also why it has a number of the security vulnerabilities that it does. So all the action in BGP is in policy. Each network gets to decide which path to pick and which paths to allow its neighbors to use based on its own business needs, availability, performance, robustness, and so on. So that's a good thing, right? It allows a lot of autonomy to let different parts of the Internet decide how their infrastructure will be used. On the flip side, it's bad because false information that disseminates from any one of those domains can have sort of a butterfly effect where other parts of the Internet are now receiving and potentially using false information. And so that's the crux of the tension we have to have between preserving the local autonomy of the different parts of the Internet while ensuring the information they send and receive is more accurate. So if you go to the next slide. So a core question then is, how do you secure a system like this whose correct functioning is critical to the operation of the Internet, but the local autonomy of the different parts of it need to be respected? So the philosophy here is, first we need to trust but verify. All of the solutions proposed for interdomain routing security rely in some fashion on validation of the information that's propagated, some notion of ground truth. And that's going to be a recurring theme in our recommendations. A second is to do no harm. We have to make sure that in the effort to make the system more secure, we don't ironically make it less robust. So we have to make sure that all things are done in a safe and phased fashion to make sure that we don't actually compromise the core operation of the interdomain routing system in our zeal to secure it. And finally, we have to preserve the autonomy of the different parts of the Internet to meet their own business objectives in any real viable solution. So if you go to the next slide, essentially what the group did over the last 6 months is, first we documented known threats, things that could happen and things that have happened, to understand better what the problems are and which attacks we can consider in our scope. We identified a number of security solutions ranging from today's best common practices to all the way to cryptographic path validation, things that are done today and things that are perhaps not yet ready to be done, and things in the middle like origin certification that are starting to be ready for prime time. We identified a lot of ways of comparing these solutions in terms of their technical maturity and cost, all the way to what influence they might have on the local autonomy of the different parts of the Internet. And based on those comparisons, we have the recommendations I'm going to describe next. So if you go to the next slide. These are the most important of the three categories of recommendations. This is really about establishing ground truth. Without ground truth, none of the security solutions that are being proposed work. And so these three recommendations are to network operators, people operating large ISPs, small ISPs, enterprises, data centers, content network, and so on. And the first one is something that can be done readily today, and in fact many people are, which is to ensure that Internet routing registry data about what address blocks are owned by whom, with owned in quotes since we don't really own Internet addresses, and that those records are public, complete, and up to date. This is to enable today's best common practices to work. But the long-term goal is to have actual certification of routing resources using resource public key infrastructure as one example technology for doing this. And based on the work at the Internet Standards Bodies, the IETF, a number of different regional Internet registries around the world have been starting to offer a resource public key infrastructure, or RPKI. And ARIN, the North American American Registry for Internet Numbers, has had a pilot service since 2009, and this year is planning to offer a hosted RPKI service for its members to use. And so I'm going to turn over right now for a few minutes to John Curran, the President and CEO of ARIN, just to say a few words about that. Oh, there he is.
Thank you and good morning. I'm John Curran, President and CEO of ARIN. We are the American Registry for Internet Numbers. We are the IP address registration and management entity for Canada, U.S., and 25 economies in the Caribbean. So all the service providers that need Internet addresses to connect customers or computers to the Internet in this region work through ARIN to accomplish that. We have about 4,100 members. Obviously, if you're a service provider, you're going to be participating. I'm happy to see the reports of this working group. This has been something that's been actively discussed by our members for some time. We do have a pilot right now where people can work on what's called RPKI, or Resource Public Key Infrastructure, to get experience with the technology. And the ARIN board, based on the input of the members, has committed to a production-hosted RPKI service, which will be rolling out this year. As the organization that's responsible for issuance and management of the IP addresses, it's fairly important that we're the ones certifying. The right holder is the one that's actually using them, so we're an essential part of this. The working group recommendations are in alignment with what we've heard from the community, and it's good to see that the working group has made a step forward in saying that this is the best practice that should be adopted. Happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, John. If we could go back to the slides, that'd be great. So we basically wanted to just encourage John and his team to continue what they're already planning to do, which is to offer a hosted RPKI infrastructure in this year. And finally, right now, each of these different regional Internet registries are offering their own RPKI service, and there's not a single global root of trust for that RPKI. And so in the longer term, the Internet Architecture Board and a number of members of the BGP security community are suggesting we should go towards a single global root of trust. This is obviously an issue far beyond the scope of this room, since it's a global issue to have a single body that is trusted around the world to serve this. But it's very important for making sure the information of who owns which address blocks is unique and consistent, and rather than actually managed by a lot of different parties. So we also advocate that the community advocate towards having a single global root of trust. The next set of recommendations are towards the phased deployment of techniques for detecting and preventing route hijacking. So once this information is available, people can start using it for anything from alarming, to be able to tell when something wrong is being propagated in the routing system, all the way towards eventually being able to automatically detect and prevent route hijacking. Now, this is something that we have to proceed with cautiously, both because the technology here is not yet fully mature, so this will naturally happen in a phased way, and it will also happen in a phased way because different bodies that make up the Internet are going to make their own choices about how to bring the network information into their own administrative processes, and whether they're going to use this information in conjunction with other data they already have to detect attacks, to prevent attacks, and so on. And so these recommendations are really geared towards enabling each of those bodies to do their part to protect the routing system, but stop short of saying exactly how they should use this data, instead preserving their local autonomy to do it in ways they see appropriate. So these recommendations are, first, a very high-level one, that as this moves forward, it's really increasingly important that people operating networks should actually be deeply involved in the BGP security community. And by that I mean the standards bodies like the IETF, the network operator community, and the regional Internet registries like ARIN, to make sure that they're aware of the technologies, and if there are any issues they want to raise, that those issues are addressed. The second is for these different administrative entities to start considering phased deployment strategies for their own network, consistent with their own internal policies. And finally, this is more a message to the rest of us in the BGP security community to start investigating what new risks we might have by introducing RPKI or other technologies like it into the Internet, to make sure that we don't, in the process of securing the Internet, make it less robust. And that's a topic as we're going to be focusing on quite a bit in our working group in the next stage. And finally, this last category is just to note a need for the BGP security community to be really collecting better metrics and measurements about the routing system. There's not really yet global agreement on what's a good way to detect an attack, to decide whether it's intentional or accidental, to understand its scope, its frequency, and its impact. And so we need to do a better job identifying metrics we can use to quantify these things and perform continuous monitoring of the routing system using both public and commercially available data so that we can better understand both how the network is performing now and how proposed security solutions would perform, or as they get deployed, how they are performing. And so that's another topic we're going to look at more closely in our next report. Finally, just to conclude, there's beyond the things I've just mentioned, our working group had a lot of discussion about this trade-off between security and autonomy, and we certainly recognize that a lot of the issues here around certification of numbered resources and operational procedures have a lot of externalities related to not only security but also policy and economics, and so that's a topic we're going to talk quite a bit about in the months ahead. And we just want to stress that the recommendations we've given here are advisory in nature, and we're going to continue focusing towards our next report on refining these recommendations and exploring further ways to improve interdomain routing security. I'm sorry. Any questions?
Looking forward to discussion.
So, again, Andy Ellis from Akamai. First of all, it's great work. I've been more passive on the working group than active, but it's been really interesting watching everything go back and forth. I think the most salient point to walk away with is not simply the recommendations, but that point that we have to look at the vulnerabilities we may introduce. I would point everybody at the SSL certificate authority infrastructure as a case in point of a significant vulnerability that was introduced by adding a security layer, specifically in the way in which it was administered.
Thank you.
Bill Smith with PayPal. I'd also like to speak in favor of the report. The other one thing I heard you mention, and I think is extremely important, and that is the ability for network operators to have autonomy, give information, but not prescribe what must be done. And that is a key point, and one that, as someone who's participating at some of the work at the ITU with respect to the ITRs, I'm very concerned about, with the ITU basically attempting to move and take over pieces of either the standards or operational nature of the Internet. It's essential that autonomy be preserved for network operators.
Thank you, Bill.
Craig Spizo, Online Trust Alliance. Again, great report, great efforts here. I was happy to see the discussion of metrics, and I just encourage time spent on that. Also look at adoption. So there's many facets of that. And again, to echo Andy's point that sometimes we do experience some unintended consequences in the security area. And clearly some of the challenges in the certificate authority ecosystem are a key point to that. So looking forward to your metrics and participating.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? If not, Jennifer, we'll assume you're making the motion to approve the report. Do we have a second for this?
Second.
Okay. Andy?
A second.
Second. All in favor of the report? Aye. Any opposed? And on the phone, Ryan Chapman. Jack Doan.
Approved.
Craig Donaldson.
Approved.
Barry Green.
Approved.
Elise Kim.
Approved.
William Sagal. William? All right. Thank you very much. The motion passes, and another major step towards cybersecurity I think is going to be very important for us. Thank you. And now we'll move to Group 7 with Michael Reardon and also Donna Dodson.
Hi there. Mike O'Riordan here, Chairman of the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to the people that worked in the group. We were working under extremely tight deadlines. When I first got involved with this, I said, no, we're never going to get this done on time, and was encouraged furiously to get it done on time. So I'd like to pay tribute to the following people who were absolutely pivotal in what we did. My co-chair, Dr. Pete Furnash of the DHS, Paul Diamond from CenturyLink, who was one of the editors, Bob Thornbury, without whom it was just, inconceivable we'd have got there, Neil Schwartzman, who was the secretary, and Vern Mosley from the FCC, who did some absolutely sterling work in getting everything working totally seamlessly behind the scenes. So thank you very much. The membership of the group. The membership of the group is pretty diverse, really. It's sort of ISPs, we've got banking in there, public interest groups, security companies, OS vendors, academics and trade associations. And I think this really reflects the nature of the problem that we've got. Bots and botnets can't just be solved by the ISPs alone. It's a whole ecosystem that needs to get together, a whole group of people. Everybody's got a sort of, horse in the race, I believe is the phrase over here. So everybody's got something that they've got to contribute to this particular problem. And so we tried to bring together as broad a church as possible of people to bear on the problem to actually come out with our report. Bots themselves are a massive problem in the US and globally. They're mainly driven by criminal enterprises. I mean, this is really important. This is about crime, and this is about ripping people off. And what are they doing? They look to spam, to do ID theft, distributed denial of service. Sometimes you get a bot on your machine, it's going to sew up all your data and then say, give me $50 to unencrypt it. I mean, these are massive problems, and these are massive problems for everyday people. These are for your granny, your mum, your dad, your aunts, your uncles, your kids. These are the problems that are being, and these bots cause problems for those sorts of people. So this is something we do have to deal with. As I say, I'm relieved we made it on time. Relieved we got in, and getting in under the wire was a challenge. We did receive a number of comments on the report itself. We received some comments from Uma Chandrasekhar, Rod Rasmussen, Timothy DeFoggy, Laurie Flaherty at the DOT, and Gina Green on behalf of Bob Azzi from Sprint. Those comments have either been acknowledged privately or have been written into the report, and I suspect the most noticeable of all the comments you'd see on the front page of the final report. Well, underneath the title it says very boldly and very nobly, this is a voluntary code. So it says a voluntary code, so to just drive that point home. So I'd like to get on with just going through my slides now. So if we can go to slide the one with work plan. Next slide, please. Next one again. Okay. So basically, this report was based on the output from CISRIC 2, the Morgue recommendations, and what is now an IETF RFC. That means a request for comments, which is a set of guidelines which have been produced by the IETF. That was the first phase of our report. The second phase is to identify barriers to code participation. And I'm hoping there's not going to be too many barriers to code participation. It's looking good at the moment. And the third one, which actually I believe to be the most challenging of all, is around the metrics. Measuring how effective this code is and measuring how, what the scale of the bot problem is very, very tough. There are an awful lot of people produce reports ranging from the sort of hopelessly optimistic to the scarily ridiculous. And we need to find out what the truth is in there. But the fact is the truth isn't very good. And the problem is significant, but it would be really handy to be able to actually meter that much more accurately. So, the status is that we have a code of conduct. We've come out with that code of conduct, and I'm going to talk to that in a moment. It's a voluntary code, and it provides a framework for ISPs to better understand and help address the bot issue. And it's got 5 objectives. We're looking at encouraging ISPs to participate in end-user education, telling end users what they can do, how they can make themselves more secure on the internet. For ISPs to get involved in the detection of the bots and botnets on their network. For ISPs to notify, or for people to notify end users of potential bot infections, to give them guidance and direction to resources for remediation, and then for ISPs to collaborate and share information about the problem. Because actually, an awful lot of the good work that's been done on things like spam have been down to collaboration and sharing. That's the most effective way. The internet is a collaborative environment, and for us to actually deal with this problem, we need to deal with it in a collaborative manner. So what are the principles for the code? It's voluntary. This is absolutely key. So we're encouraging voluntary action to be taken by ISPs. It's technology neutral. Nobody's saying you've got to use this technology or that technology. Use the technology that's appropriate for your network, for your ISP. It doesn't prescribe any particular approach. Respect for privacy is very, very important. And we encourage that you're going to respect privacy in accordance with law, the local laws. Legal compliance, obviously. Shared responsibility. Everybody needs to participate, and I think that's why we sort of I mentioned the sort of makeup of the group. There's an awful lot of work going on in a number of other forums, a White House-led initiative, and one with Ari Schwartz at NIST. And those initiatives bring in other participants who are very, very necessary in the work that we're going to have to do in order to suppress the problem of bots and botnets. Sustainability. The activities that the ISPs undertake have to be consistent with their cost base and with the economic model they operate under. As I say, information sharing is absolutely fundamental to how we deal with the problem. Got to take measures that are appropriate and effective. You can't expect them to be, ISPs to be doing things, a large ISP to be, rather a small ISP to be doing things that a large ISP might do if it's not appropriate in their context. And communications needs to be with customers needs to be easily understood and accessible to the recipients. Those are very important. So what is Working Group 7 recommending? We're recommending that ISPs and other service providers offering broadband internet service to residential users participate in the US Voluntary Code of Conduct and indicate their agreement to participate in the voluntary code by contacting the entity of their choice or self-asserting on their company webpage. There isn't an organisation which is going to sit there and take a register. It's not the FCC, it's not a government body. If you choose to if the ISPs choose to participate in this code, they can put it on their webpage. We are a participating code, and we're participating in the US Anti-Bot Code of Conduct for ISPs, which we're shortening to the ABCs for ISPs. It's credit to Vern again. So what are the next steps? We're going to determine the long-term administration for code participation. I mean, it might be handy to have a central registry somewhere, but obviously a voluntary one. And begin phase 2, which is the identification of barriers to code participation. Phase 3 is in fact underway. We've already started that work. A lot of that work we're basing on work that's been previously done at Morg, and some very, very important work that's been done led by Kevin Sullivan from Microsoft, who's done an enormous amount of work and has been a real leader in this field. So that's it. I'm happy to take questions, suggestions, what have you.
All right. I think Donna is here. Donna?
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning. We're pleased to be here this morning. As you know, NIST and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, as part of Department of Commerce, in cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security, released an RFI in September on this question of botnets, and we're really pleased to see the work that's groups like the CISRIC are doing, the industry botnet group that was recently formed, and we are encouraged to see both of these groups coming together working on this critical problem. So we appreciate the voluntary nature of the work that's being done here, that's being promoted, and we're hopeful that we'll all be able to continue to work together as a community to solve our botnet challenges. NIST is preparing now to host a workshop to understand the technology tools and the toolkit that could be used to support the botnet problem as a way to provide that technical foundation that then could be used by some of the groups that we talked about here in the report. So we want to thank everybody for their attention to this, and we're looking forward to our continued work with the community on this problem.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you for being here with us today as well. And Mike, thank you as well, the hard work and your report. We'll open the floor up now for comments or questions. Craig?
Good morning. Craig Spiesel, Online Trust Lines. I just want to point out it is a shared responsibility, as Michael mentioned, and it's been a great effort within the group, and there's other stakeholders, obviously, that need to get involved. But I just want to underscore a few points here. One, the severity of this problem. There's estimates of less than 1 in 10 computers are infected. There are some that are actually saying the number is even greater than that. So you think about that around the room here. Several of us probably have a computer that's infected. So that's a key point there. The other point is I want to acknowledge, some ISPs are already doing this today, and by our analysis, that reflects about 29% of the residential broadband users today are being afforded protection by leading ISPs that have self-asserted. And that equates to about 23 million of the 81 million households. So we have some great steps we've achieved, and we're looking forward to other carriers and ISPs of self-asserting this important work. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Bill?
Yes, Bill McGinnis with Internet Identity. Just wanted to speak on behalf of our organization, who works directly with many of the affected commercial entities in this space. We've seen the stories, and we've seen the direct impact that this has on end users and consumers and businesses alike, who have in many cases been hurt in very severe ways. And so we just want to commend the efforts of this working group as well.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, sir.
Brian Oliger with WTOP Radio here in Washington. As someone who's charged with the hands-on repairing of damage done by bots on almost a daily basis, I'd speak in favor of the report.
Thank you, Brian. Yes.
Hello, I'm Christian Vogler from Gallaudet University. And I am very pleased. I'm very happy to see the results of your work. And I would like to add one comment from my perspective, which is representing people with disabilities, people who are deaf and hard of hearing, as well as other disabilities. And I would like to introduce a caution that any methods that are being used for remediation should not block access or accessibility, the accessible technology that people with disabilities use. For example, I noticed in the IETF that was recently proposed for repair of issues, there's one possible approach called the walled garden that was introduced, the walled garden. And as I looked at it, there are people such as myself who are deaf, for whom the internet is our lifeline, not just for communication, but for other aspects as well. So it's my way of calling 911 services, for calling other people. So we would want to make sure that that information is not blocked, whatever is done for remediation.
Thank you.
The work that the team did is just impressive, and especially under the pressure, and I'm entirely in favor of the proposal. I'd like to bring up a caveat and ask that the chairman and Jeff and Jamie sort of take on a task that relates to this one if we pass it. And it takes a little bit of context. About 11 years ago, the Deputy National Security Advisor called a meeting in the White House of what he called the Dirty Minds Project, and he brought together the very top experts from each of the ISPs and other places who really knew how the internet worked to say, what would you want to do if you wanted to destroy the internet in the United States? How would you do that if you were a nation state? And if you're going to defend against it, you want to know that. I'm not going to go in, and they invited me too, probably not because of the expertise, because of the dirty mind, but so I sat through this meeting, and I'm not going to go into the exact methods because they are still just as effective as they would be today. But what was breathtaking about it is how small the number of machines that you would need to do it is. So of all the things we're talking about today, this particular one is the most directly connected with the protection of what Gallaudet wants to do with the Internet and what the rest of us want to do with the Internet. This is the one that matters most. And I know more about it than I want to, because both the Attorney General Department in Australia, Mike Rothery, who's the National Security Resilience Policy guy, and Pete Coriolis, who led the iCode effort in Australia, that sort of triggered a lot of the discussions we're having in the United States, told me what was really happening in the implementation of a voluntary code. And the bottom line, I don't want to do detail, but the bottom line is a few ISPs actually do it and make a difference, and all of the others use it as a marketing program. Can't stop that. That's a voluntary program. What I'm hoping, Glenn, you'll take on is what Jen was talking about. We have to have metrics. If we say we're going to do something and it matters to the country, we need to be able to measure how effective we are. And I'd love for you to bring this up in a year and force us to say exactly what decrease in the number of bots did we have this year. And if we don't have the measurement system in place, that's the first task, not the voluntary code. Because a voluntary code without a measurement system is the same as no code. So I'm 100% in favor of doing it, but a measurement system is the prerequisite for having any confidence that we are actually attacking the problem rather than just a marketing program for ISPs.
That's a good point, Alan. Let me let Jeff talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, Alan, I agree. And in the charter or the descriptions for all three of the groups that gave readouts and reports this morning, and I think most of them mentioned this, they've got work to come. They're not finished. All three of them have that problem in front of them. They were asked to develop metrics and to, I think the term performance metrics carries some baggage these days. So what we're trying to do is to determine the extent to which the recommendations that were made today are having an impact and fixing the problem that they were set out to fix. And at the end of the cycle, they are all supposed to come back with essentially a report, almost exactly what you described, that describes the impact that they have had with these recommendations. Okay? So that's in front of us.
Yes, sir.
In fact, just to Alan's point, the work that we're doing on metrics in Working Group 7 is going to be based on work that's been going on for about 2 years now in the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group that I mentioned earlier with Kevin Sullivan at Microsoft. And consequently, we're beginning to get an understanding of the problem, and a lot of the problem really is around the disparate technologies that the ISPs are using to gather the information, which some of us are gathering that information in different ways. But it is definitely something where we're learning what the issues are, because this is a complicated issue and requires an awful lot of input.
So, Mike, your group is working on this, the metrics possibility, the best practices, or?
Oh yes, we've been doing it for the last couple of years, and a variety of ISPs are involved, and I'd encourage any other ISP that isn't involved, be they members of Morg or not, to please contact us and get involved, because the more data we can get, the better the reliability of those statistics will be. We've been publishing statistics on spam for since about 2005, and the aim is to come out certainly from Morg on a regular basis with an anonymized level of bots on a global basis, which I think would be very, very useful and has the advantage of not holding any particular ISP up to either praise or ridicule.
Great. Thank you.
I just would push the idea that praise and ridicule is a very good thing if you care about the problem. If you want the problem to get solved, you need to say that ISP is doing it, not just saying he's doing it. So praise and ridicule is a very effective technique.
Unfortunately, it's not the way we've been working at Morgan. We really wouldn't be going down that line.
Okay. Thank you. All right, any other discussion on Group 7? Bill?
Bill Smith with PayPal. Certainly in favor of carrot and stick, if done appropriately. But I think as we discussed and presented here, Working Group 7 sees this as botnets are not simply an issue for ISPs to solve. This is a much broader problem. It's not just within the United States. This is an international issue. And so even if we were to clean up everything and be 100% clean with respect to botnets, we would still have the problem here. So I urge some caution in the use of the stick. I think carrots are good. A little bit of stick where it makes sense. But again, this is a much broader problem than just the ISPs. We have to attack it holistically.
Yes, Craig.
Craig Spiesel, All Nine Trust Alliance. I want to follow up on that. We've been doing scorecards in multiple areas of technology for about 4 years to look at what is the progress of adoption. So we've been looking at other areas of technologies in the banking community, e-commerce and such. We do believe in positive affirmation. I think shining a light as a North Star and pointing out to those is a good thing. And we'll continue to do that, and we'll actually be issuing reports on the specific area of self-asserted ISPs. And we'll be releasing a report today on that. Second point, getting back to the gentleman's concern about metrics, this is very complicated, and as I worked with Michael several years ago on the spam report, it's not that we're able to decrease spam. Spam, as absolute number of mails continues to increase. And so we have to look at that of what we're able to impact. So that while the absolute level of bots may be increasing, how effective are we able to detect it? So it is a complicated area. It's one, there's several elements, and also one that's an ecosystem. And the earlier point that Michael mentioned is that there's other stakeholders that have a line of sight of this data. So it's not just ISPs. There's AV vendors, the banking community and such. So it's how do we pull this together to have some meaningful metrics that are really representative. So key point, we have to do it, but it's not a simple task.
Andy Ellis from Akamai. So I have sort of two distinct points here. So one is, A, I'm in favor of anything we can do within reason to reduce the botnet threat. As somebody who spends pretty much every day placing himself between botnets and his customers, while it's monetizable, I'd really like to have less of that happening. But a second one, I would caution everybody who talks about naming and shaming ISPs. And in a previous report, we talked about how you can have a strategic differentiator for supporting DNSSEC. The singular form of data is not anecdote, but I'm going to share one anyway. Right now, in the community that I live in, Verizon, Fios, and Comcast are in a knockdown, drag-out fight for people's eyeballs. They're literally canvassing the streets. Both of them have teams of people who walk around the neighborhood to talk to you about their services. And I've had many, many conversations with them. Because I was curious, would Comcast mention DNSSEC? Not once. Security of the services has never been mentioned at any point as a differentiator between either of those. They're completely talking about cost, performance, and availability. So I'd be very careful that, certainly from what I'm seeing as a consumer, I don't see the ISPs thinking that security is at all a strategic differentiator for them.
Other comments, discussion? Okay, if not, we'll ask for a second to Mike's report. Second from Bill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? We didn't ask for abstentions earlier. Any opposed? Nay. I'll ask individually for those on the phone. Jack Doan.
Approved.
Craig.
Approved.
Barry Green.
Approved.
Elise.
Approved.
And William. All right. The motion is approved, carries. Thank you for the report, and thank you for another adoption of a major step here in cybersecurity. Thank you. I also want to express my appreciation to the crispness and the focus of these reports. We're taking some very complex issues and bring them down to a much more simple level that we can discuss and understand, and I appreciate that. There's a lot of work goes into just that part of this effort. So thank you for these reports. We're ahead of schedule this morning. So we'll move on to the next report. I think it's Working Group 4 with Network Security Best Practices with Tony Tauber. Tony?
All right, so, hello? Microphone, okay. Working Group 4 is at an earlier stage, not ready for a thorough interim report. That's expected to come in June, at the June meeting, but I wanted to give an update on our status. I don't know if the slides are ready for people. Okay. So, second slide. Here's the description of the working group from when it was chartered. The idea is that with the DNSSEC and the routing security working groups, those are 5 and 6, that those represent work on future protocol extensions and deployments. And Working Group 4 has a charter to work on near-term issues and solutions in both those domains and see what benefit we could provide in the interim. So the co-chairs are Rod Rasmussen and Rodney Jaffe. Neither could make it today, so I'll be presenting on behalf of the group. We've got 30 organizations represented across the across service providers, network operators, academics, government and IT consultants as well. Next slide. Just as some clarification on the scope, because it is a little tricky, both because DNSSEC and routing security are in very different stages of maturity with regard to their protocol work and deployment. So the focus is to things we can do now with current hardware and software without significant capital investment, and really try and realize some benefit even as these parallel tracks of protocol extensions are pursued. So, as I said, two different domains of inquiry, which is DNS and then BGP and interdomain routing. We also have to work with these other groups to clarify areas of overlap and really make sure that we can provide some extra value with what we can recommend. So things that may be orthogonal to the exact work that's going on in working groups 5 and 6. Next slide. So where we are so far, we've got a matrix of DNS issues, including mapping out some of the problem space, the ISP roles, challenges, and kind of a sketch of possible solutions. In BGP, we've also got working on identifying existing BCPs as well as future work that we could do to benefit the service provider and operator community in terms of recommendations that they can implement today that are being implemented successfully in places and give kind of a crisper set of instructions with, again, as the theme you've seen this morning, the goal isn't to dictate, but rather to recommend and facilitate. Just to give a high-level overview of the DNS issues that we've talked about, cache poisoning attacks, hacking or misconfiguration of DNS servers, DNS and domain hijacking, DNS servers used for amplification and DDoS attacks, rewriting authoritative DNS responses, and customers getting infected with software that manipulates their DNS settings, leading to phishing and other kinds of attacks that have been plaguing people for quite a while, and insecure zone transfers. So there's a number of opportunities here, both on the technical and the business process side, to improve the situation. A lot of these attacks come from not purely technical exploits, but sometimes social engineering attacks, people being misled to and enticed to reveal information that leads to some kind of compromise of their authority over a certain part of the DNS space, or to reconfigure things that in a way that doesn't serve them well. For routing issues, big issue is routing leaks, as Jennifer and Working Group 6 has laid out. There's route hijacks, route leaks, denials of service that are well known as vulnerabilities to the current routing infrastructure. There's ways to help guard against this with best current practices, and we'd like to work on codifying a bunch of those so that in the time that it takes to work on some of these protocol extensions and other considered things, that we can take the current deployed software and see some improvement in what's possible. Also, the spoofing of source IP address is a big issue for denial of service and other types of attacks. That's related to routing, but also importantly the subject of filtering at the edge of service provider networks, and that's another area that the group is interested in pursuing. So our timeline is for June meeting, which is 3 months, I think, to the day, that we'll have a more thorough report, flesh out the issues, the actors, and get some recommendations for improvements to DNS and routing that we'll be able to present to the group and hopefully get met with approval. So we're still, as I said, working on the stakeholders in the problem space because not all of them are current ISPs. A lot of them are enterprises registering domain names and interacting with ISPs and registry providers. They're also address holders who we'll need to work with to improve their understanding of the issues of routing security. And then continuing on through the quarterly meetings, work on a final report for a year from now. We've been meeting biweekly. Since we have these kind of two different tracks, it's kind of alternating sets of domain experts, and so the progress is I don't know if it's halved, but it takes a while because there's quite a difference in the two different problem spaces and solution spaces, but we're proceeding. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments, discussion? Tony's report? Yes. Yeah.
Sure. Bill Smith from PayPal. I noticed in the IP spoofing, I'm just wondering whether there's likely to be a recommendation to do egress filtering per, let's say, one of the IETF spec RFCs or something, because it's certainly not a silver bullet, but doing something like that would be helpful for distributed denial of service attacks.
Exactly, and that's an area of keen interest to the group, because it seems that it hasn't really been studied in this kind of way by industry folks, and trying to come up with an opt-in, well, not opt-in, but a a voluntary but strong carrot, if you will, recommendation to use things like what's called BCP 38 for ingress filtering, some things that have been defined by the community for actually several years, and really try and widen the adoption and understanding of those because the technology is there to make it possible.
Other questions, comments?
Got one here.
Oh, over there.
Sure. And, hesitant to jump in because I'm not a member of the council, but with respect to BCP 38, that's been, BCP stands for Best Common Practices, and that's been a recommendation from the IETF for several years. I chaired ICANN's Security and Stability Advisory Committee, and we similarly adopted that as a recommendation and have been a strong supporter of it and would very much like to see some positive motion there. So if your group is willing to jump on that and push it, that would be all to the best.
Great, thanks.
Comments, questions? Okay, Tony's report is a status report. We aren't voting today on this, but thank you, Tony, for the report. Appreciate that. The next three reports will be final reports that will call for votes. Working Group 1, Next Generation 911 with Brian Fonts and Laurie Flaherty, and then we have 911 Location Accuracy with Steve Wisely and Richard Craig. And then Working Group 9 with CAP Migration with Chris Homer and Ed Zanicki. So this time we'll go with Working Group 1 and Brian and Laurie.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for being here today. And just like to go over our Working Group 1 second report to the CISRIC. I have the great honor of working with Laurie Flaherty, and one of the reasons that Jeff was able to encourage me to participate in this working group was actually to work with Laurie Flaherty. So I also want to thank Patrick Donovan, who was here earlier, and the FCC staff, and Jerry Stanshine for their work in aiding our group in completing its tasks. I also would like to recognize two of our leaders. One is not here today, Brian Daly, who chairs the working group that did a lot of the work for today's report. And I'd also like to have Jenny Hansen, who's in the back row, stand up for a moment, just wave. Jenny is an individual who's been successfully able to cram 48 hours of work into a 24-hour day. So I'm quite impressed with her and all of the work that she continues to do. In order to provide the information on our report, I would like to just give you kind of a quick summary of what the first report was about, because it's based on that first report that additional work was done. So the original task assigned to Working Group 1 was to identify ongoing work related to Next Generation 911 network architecture, including the standards development efforts such as the National Emergency Number Association's I3 standard and the work of others. The working group shall label aspects of identified standards as critical for deployment, critical for competition, standards that are desirable, long-term, or non-critical. In addition, the working group shall identify any gaps in existing or developmental standards work and classify the importance and urgency of resolving those gaps. The working group shall identify criteria that signify the technical and operational readiness of a region or statewide 911 system to accept Next Generation 911 calls and data. The report addressing those issues was originally submitted and approved by CISRIC on December 8th. Now, based on that report, we had additional add-ons, as Jeff called it, and I'd like to turn it over to Laurie to go through the add-ons for the Working Group 1's initial report.
Thank you, Mr. Fonz. As Brian said, the work that we submitted, are submitting today, is based upon the December report that was submitted to this body in December. So based on the work that had already been done by our working group to prioritize the gaps in the identified standards, we were asked that we prioritize those gaps. to identify those, obviously, which have a greater urgency in terms of being identified as well as addressed. We were also asked to clarify specific portions of the report, one in particular to clarify the access network types that the report referred to in a specific portion, and the group did that. And we were also asked to complete a specific portion of a gap that had been identified, but it was felt that the work perhaps needed a little bit more work, if you will, just to complete it. So that is the work that you saw before you when we submitted our report. Just to give you a little bit of a status report, there was an add-on task that was given to us with regard to our second task as well. That initial task was to identify criteria for readiness on the behalf of the 911 system to accept NG 911 calls. We did develop those criteria, and that was in the December report. But based on that December report, we have been asked to, for each of those criteria, come up with metrics or come up with a measurable outcome that would serve as an indicator of the readiness of the 911 system to accept NG 911 calls, to provide specific information about evidence signaling the readiness of PSAPs, but not in a detailed list. In other words, it really wasn't necessary to include a complete list of every data, every function, but rather when those things had been accomplished, how could you tell? What was the outcome, and is that outcome measurable so that we know when the NG 911 system is ready to accept NG 911 calls? Jenny is heading the subgroup that is working on that task. That work will be submitted to this body at its next meeting, which I believe will be in June. So going back to what we did submit to this group for today, we were asked to go back to the identified gaps in the original report, the December report, and to prioritize them. And the group did that. So we prioritized them, giving them numbers 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the highest priority. But the priority is not necessarily based on the importance, but rather interdependence. In other words, in order for the priority 2 items to be accomplished, it depends on the priority 1 things already having been completed. So the group went ahead and prioritized all of the gaps identified in terms of those priorities, and it was that priority 1, 2, and 3 was added to the table, the last column of the table that included that information. We also were asked, as I mentioned, to clarify one specific portion of our report with regard to the network types. And rather than go into detail, you all had a chance to review that. That is found on a table, particularly at a specific endpoint called the End User Location Integrity on page 13 and 14 of the report. We were also asked to provide a little bit more depth in terms of a specific portion of the report having to do with legacy origination networks on page 10. That clarification, we did expound on that, and that was included in the report as well. So, back to you, Brian.
Since the report's been out to everyone, we've sought edits. We've received no edits. That's always a good sign, I hope. And so we submit our report to the CISRIC Council.
Thank you, Brian and Laurie. We'll open the floor for comments and discussion. You all did a very good job, obviously, covering this, and appreciate the report, and the work in 911 certainly enhances our nation's safety and security, and thank you for the work here. At this time, we'll ask for a vote. I'm sure that Brian is making a motion. We accept this report. Do we have a second? A second down here. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And those of you on the phone, Jack?
Approved.
Craig?
Approved.
Barry?
Approved.
Elise? Elise? All right.
Yes, sorry, I had, okay, yes.
That's all right. Thank you. Vote unanimous, and it carries, it passes. Thank you very much for another outstanding report. All right. The next group is Working Group 3, 911 Location Accuracy. Steve and Richard.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining Rich and I. I'm presenting Work Group 3. Okay. We list for you all the participants, a fairly significant size work group that we had. And we just want to show you on the outdoor location accuracy, we had subgroup leaders. We want to thank Jenna Green and Brett Schneider for leading this effort. And not the least of which, we always like to thank those individuals that are the document editors, which is the hardest job in any work group, I think. And Jenna and Kathy McMahon did that work very well. Work Group 3 had 2 face-to-face meetings and 40-plus conference calls to arrive at this outdoor report. And as the further, the earlier slide showed you that there were 40-plus members and 36 different organizations that worked on this report. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank Stacy Hartman as chairperson of the steering committee and Jeff Goldthorpe for really helping Rich and I out and moving this work along. And clearly Patrick Donovan has always been very good to work with. Work Group 3 has been challenged to provide 3 different reports. So we today we'll be talking about outdoor accuracy testing, and then in June we're due to deliver a report at indoor accuracy testing, and we have a year from now before we get into commercial LBS technologies. So today we'll deal with outdoor accuracy testing. One of the 3 areas that we wanted to address were the questions that were referred to us in the docket 7114, which had to do with the location accuracy requirements. And we were charged with developing some approaches to outdoor location accuracy testing criteria, the procedures, and timeframes that are reasonable and cost-effective, and also considering the alternatives to the current FCC OET 71. And further, we were asked to develop some recommendations concerning the feasibility of some flexible testing criteria and methodologies, and how we would gather cost data for this method. The work group came to a number of conclusions that we present to the group, and all of you that are on the full panel have had the opportunity to read the 32-plus page report. But our consensus is that the ADIS 50001 generally provides more current and relevant procedures and guidelines than are available in the OET 71. That probably rings good to Susan's ears there. And although there are many valid approaches to location accuracy performance, some of them provide a more cost-effective way to achieve and maintain location accuracy within the wireless service provider's network. The third conclusion in our summary is that Since the bulletin was originally issued, the ADIS Emergency Services Interconnection Form, otherwise known as ESIF to all of us, or many of us, have produced 5 additional standards documents, and each of these documents was reviewed by the work group. And as a consequence of the review of the ADIS materials, we suggest that the following ADIS technical reports, and you can read them as well as I do, can be used to be recognized and be used as by the various stakeholders as the best practice for outdoor location accuracy. And the multiple testimony can show you that there's different approaches and different topologies that are defined in the ADIS reports, and we believe that they're very good and workable documents. On the next slide, we talk about our consensus is that it does generally provide more current and relevant procedures than are in the OET 71. And while there are many valid approaches to location accuracy performance, some of them provide a more cost-effective way to achieve and maintain the location accuracy within a network. And we will also talk about in our section 5, when you delve into the report, we'll supplement the information available in the ADIS 5 multi-01 by providing some alternative methodologies for doing location accuracy testing. In the last slide, we talk about that we concur that the ADIS document provides the best practices for conducting empirical accuracy testing. It also provides the appropriate guidelines and the accepted procedures for use of predictive testing methodologies. And I might add there was quite a bit of discussion on that, and that we did reach consensus. And as well as it'll put in the proper safeguards for using predictive testing. And we would recommend to the FCC that further development and guidance on the various alternative testing methodologies as defined within our report of Work Group 3 to be documented within the ADIS 50.0010, which is maintenance testing. I might add that on this slide that we're talking today, that we don't have a slide summarizing the cost effectiveness of different methodologies, but there's quite a bit of material within our report that I think will provide some interesting costing for different testing methodologies. And as we move our way down to the current FCC established rules that go back to the second report in order, they do not clearly mandate, at least to this group, a specific Phase 2 wireless yield requirement, and rather they establish a specific Phase 2 location accuracy standard that's spread over 4 defined benchmarks at the county level, and many of us in the public safety sector are aware of that. And the yield question, although the work group members generally worked in concert to provide overall objectivity and work towards best practices resolutions, the yield is a subject that we could not find consensus on, and it was a continuous point of disagreement. Phase 2 yield really may be defined as a ratio of successful acquisitions of Phase 2 location over the total number of valid location requests. And the subject of system performance and yields means different things to different stakeholders in our work group. And in an effort to provide visibility into the debate, what we did is include within Section 7 of the report a summary of the different positions. And we didn't have any consensus recommendation to make on yield, and that will be discussed more in our indoor report that will be forthcoming. And if anybody has any questions, the Division of Labor in this particular report was Rich said he would answer the questions and I would present it to everybody.
Thank you, Steve and Rich. Floor is open for questions or comments. Seeing no questions or comments, we will call for a vote on this, and I assume, Steve, you're making a motion that this report be approved and accepted. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And quickly on the phone, Jack.
Approved.
Craig.
Approved.
Barry.
Approved.
Elise.
Approved.
All right. Off of mute this time. Okay. It is approved unanimously. Thank you again, Steve and Rich, for that report and another step here toward improving our nation's safety and security. Thank you very much. Okay, our next report, Working Group 9, CAP Migration, Chris and Ed.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Chris can't be here today, so I'll be
Okay, Ed.
presenting.
Thank you.
I'll try to handle Q&A as best I can. Excuse me.
Can I ask you a question? I got an email a minute ago that you had new slides. I'm loading them. I have the ones loaded from last night. You're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
There's only one minor change in slide 4. The work group number 9 description on the second slide. Our immediate focus was taken to review the FCC's 5th report and order issued January 10th, 2012 on CAP deployment and provide recommendations of best practices on CAP implementation through 2012. This is a follow-on. Our first report, of course, was in December. The second report really focuses on the output of subcommittee number 1, which is focused on FEMA and the federal level of CAP alerting, although we've got some good input from Working Group 2, which continues to work on state and local implications. In terms of timeline, again, first report in March, first report in December, second report in March. We're anticipating a third report in June that'll be rather focused on, not so much on the rules, but on further evolution of IPAWS on the federal level and of state and local systems. Participants of our working group represent a impressively broad cross-section of EAS participants, broadcast and cable operators, the major national associations in broadcasting and cable, the government, and other communications providers, as well as just about every EAS CAP equipment manufacturer that has gone through the FEMA conformity assessment program. So a very solid cross-section and a very, very lively working group, to say the least. Bit of background, the Emergency Alert System is the primary national warning system providing the President of the United States with the ability to address the nation through a crisis, historically through broadcasting cable means. It has been best known through his work as being piggybacked by the National Weather Service and state and local entities to issue such things as severe storm warnings or Amber Alerts. The the Emergency Alert System is by and large a voluntary undertaking on the part of broadcasters. They are required to have certain gear in place, which we'll be talking about, the implications of the rules on the gear they have in place, and is voluntary in terms of what local alerts they may carry. However, it's not voluntary in terms of carrying the national or the presidential message. It is a mandate. It's your classic, horrible words here, it's your classic unfunded mandate on broadcast and cable industry. On May 31st, 2007, the FCC adopted a second report and order which started the ball rolling on the implementation of a next generation of emergency alert system with the integration of a digital XML common alerting protocol message as an overlay or as an addition to the existing tone-based emergency alert system. In response to the general CAP standard, industry, the manufacturers, that is, EAS CAP equipment manufacturers, banded together in a voluntary association, and from 2009 through 2011 produced an implementation guide, an EAS CAP implementation guide. That implementation guide was subsequently adopted by FEMA, as well as with the Common Alerting Protocol. That was the trigger event, per the second report and order, for the adoption of CAP, which started a 180-day clock for all broadcast and cable operators to implement CAP EAS compliant equipment. That deadline had been extended, I believe, 2 times, which gets us to the big event, which is June 30th, 2012, where every broadcaster, cable operator in the nation must have this new digital CAP capability installed and operating and connecting to the FEMA IPAWS network. Well, in January, the FCC released its 5th report and order on EAS, and it has some some significant implications and serious complications for this EAS CAP undertaking. Moving to the next slide. The report and order, for focusing on 2 areas. The first one is the report and order disallows the use of text-to-speech conversion technology on remote CAP EAS devices at the broadcast or cable plant. This has very significant impact in that if the FEMA IPAWS system itself is not based on the use of sending an audio file or streaming audio from the federal government. At this point, is based on sending a CAP XML message to the edge of the network at the broadcast site where it would generate text-to-speech. So this rule essentially poses an enormous hurdle to the operation of the IPAWS system. The National Weather Service, likewise, for its CAP services, was not planning on sending audio files downstream. They were also intending to leverage the use of text-to-voice conversion at the edge of the network. Similarly, a number of state and local networks already deployed and operational had likewise been predicated on the use of text-to-voice conversion at the broadcast or the cable site. This rule poses a number of complications, which we noted. We also noted that the aspect of text and speech, even if this rule is not overturned, would potentially compromise alert usability. If the text message goes down and there's no text-to-voice conversion at the end, obviously there is no audio output of the alert message on broadcast television or radio, meaning that over radio, Brian Oliger, a colleague from WTOP, could probably attest to what that would sound like, tones and then nothing, which has significant potential impact, we felt, in terms of not only not only general users, but particularly users with visual disabilities. There would be no audio output of the message from radio or TV. Second group of findings relate to device certification. We examined the EAS CAP device certification in depth. Skipping a slide here to the next one. The FCC in its report and order created a streamlined process for devices, integrated and intermediate CAP EAS devices. This is the equipment that's to be mandated that every broadcaster and cable operator in the country will have on its premises by June 30th. Our consensus is that for integrated devices, all-in-one boxes that provide the EAS and the CAP functionality, these will likely have a little impediment to meeting the requirement to be certified by June 30th. For them, it's a matter of paperwork. For component and universal intermediary devices, this is a third-party appliance that connects to a legacy EAS device. We noted they had a reasonable possibility of meeting the Part 11 certification, provided that the Part 11 testing regime is online at the earliest possible time. At this point in time, to my knowledge, to my understanding, the fifth report and order hasn't even been published in the Federal Register yet. So the window between whenever these rules get published and June 30th is literally shrinking by the day. The consensus among subcommittee members was that these intermediary devices, these third-party or outside devices that hold neither a FEMA IPAWS conformance test nor Part 11 service would likely face a significant challenge in meeting the certification requirements by June 30th, given the remaining timeline. This, of course, has a significant impact on broadcast and cable plant. By some industry estimates, as much as 80% to 90% have already purchase such a device, which may or may not be compliant to the new FCC rules. Working Group 9, next slide. Potential issues of combining the conformity assessment, which IPAWS conducted for all CAPIS equipment, with Part 11, FCC Part 11 certification. Among other issues, the FEMA CAP conformity test guidance needed for test facilities for the review and design of test support programs has not yet been publicly posted. This is FEMA's test guidance that would be used by third-party facilities. This hasn't yet been posted on the NIMS website, the National Incident Management System website. This is not necessary for devices that have already completed the FEMA CAP conformance process. Since FEMA is no longer conducting that program, it's absolutely necessary for new products or additional products to receive their required CAP certification. Nonetheless, we feel that completion of Part 11 testing of products with an existing valid supplier's declaration of conformity and an IPAWS test report is feasible by 30 June 2012. Therefore, there was a broad consensus that this situation does not warrant any extension to the 30 June CAP compliance deadline. Let's move on to our recommendations. The working group recommends that the text-to-speech prohibition be removed for the following reasons. At a minimum, it would enhance alert message usability as a backup in the event that an audio file was absent or unusable. It would also reduce operational costs for our alert originators, both in terms of the total bandwidth required by CAP originators. If under a scenario, if a message came out from IPAWS, a CAP XML file, it would contain a URL to a third-party web server where you'd have to download an MP3 file or WAV file, of approximately 800 to a megabit in size. You can imagine if 30,000 sites need to poll that file every 30 seconds, that's a dramatic redesign of some of the CAP systems that states have already invested in. It's potentially a major redesign of the IPAWS network. It would, frankly, removing that prohibition would lower the barrier to entry for state and local governments, making these CAP origination systems more accessible and more affordable. To achieve this, on the next slide, what the working group recommends is that the FCC reincorporate the EAS CAP Industry Group implementation guidelines on text-to-speech. The FCC had made a specific exception in not adopting those guidelines. The working group is recommending the FCC revisit that and reincorporate those specific guidelines to process a CAP message into a text-to-speech format that will fit within the 2-minute window for an emergency alert message. In terms of device certification, a number of administrative issues we're recommending. The FCC had issued a number of recommendations or statements of intent within the body of the fifth report and order. However, regarding intermediary devices, those didn't make into Appendix A, which were the statement of what would be revised within the Part 11 rules. So our recommendation is that the paragraphs 170 and 171 be reflected also in Appendix A, not so minor administrative issue. We're also recommending that the FCC require submission of both the vendor-supplied supplier's declaration of conformity as well as a third-party CAP conformance test report. The current rules state, when they come to fact, that the vendor should supply their own SDoc. The recommendation is that should be supplied as well as the original test report as well, which would provide the FCC a better ability to police that the product submitted for testing is actually that as it was configured, as it was tested. And that's broadly in accordance with the existing rules under Part 2 that wireless devices and electronic components have to go through, either for the conformance or for the certification process. That this testing should be also conducted by an FCC-approved third-party facility, and the FCC should disallow any self-certification for CAP conformance purposes. All the CAP conformance testing today has been done by an accredited third-party facility, originally sponsored by FEMA, As noted, FEMA is no longer supporting that particular test process, but it could readily be replicated via the FCC's own TCB process with third-party facilities. It's the same. By the way, that's the same process all EAS gear went through originally back in the 1990s. It's just revisiting that a decade and a half later, or a decade and a quarter later. Finally, our recommendation is that FEMA issue its CAP conformity test guidance as quickly as possible so that these laboratories or test facilities may begin review and design of their test support programs in, frankly, the remaining 3 months of the window before June 30th. This side is fairly self-explanatory. Our recommendation is that the June deadline remain in place. Best practices, moving through this quickly. If the text-to-speech prohibition remains in effect, several things we feel should be adopted as best practice by industry and by government. Participants will need to confirm, that broadcasters, cable operators will need to confirm with their vendors to ensure that the text-to-speech options on their devices is disabled by June 30th, or by the time these rules take effect. So there needs to be a proactive activity on the part of the participants. There also needs to be a proactive activity on the part of the manufacturers to reach out to their customers and tell them how to disable that capability so participants are in compliance with the new rules. Federal agencies, specifically the FCC and FEMA, should develop additional specific best practices and guidance for CAP EAS alert origination tools and users of those tools on making audio files available locally to be polled if the text-to-speech provision stays in place. And that's specifically outgrowth, and this may overlap a little bit of Working Group 4 and other working groups here. If audio files on remote servers are to be relied on as a source to EAS audio, then developers should consider how that audio can reside in a trusted or secure environment where the content would not be compromised before, during, or after an alert. Again, you get an XML file with new URL to go out to an unknown third-party server to download an MP3 file. That could pose complications if that file, that site is compromised or rerouted or what have you. If the text-to-speech prohibition is rescinded, the best practices get a little simpler. EAS participants should work with their manufacturers to identify and remediate any inconsistencies or errors in pronunciation with text-to-voice software. EAS CAP manufacturers should also voluntarily and proactively respond to any significant inconsistencies, errors in pronunciation, or local lexicon to a reasonable degree. Also, local government and developers should follow best practices. In either regard, they should follow best practices identified in FEMA Course IS 247 to ensure that the CAP text message being delivered doesn't contain jargon, acronyms, letter number combinations that wouldn't be usable in a text-to-voice environment. Best practices for equipment certification. Broadcast cable operators should coordinate with their respective manufacturers to understand the process by which their particular equipment will meet or won't meet the required streamlined certification process by June 30th. The FCC issued very clearly the caveat emptor in its fifth report and order that these are the rules and they need to be available by June 30th, and it's on the broadcast to make sure the gear they have meets those rules. To be rather blunt, equipment manufacturers need to take early steps, as far as early can be with 3 months left, to prepare for the requirements under the certification process to provide themselves and their users with the least level of risk. The FCC, we recommend, should ensure that equipment certifications relate to the specific product combination, hardware model and software version that was actually tested. Again, relating the IPAWS test report to the SDoc to the FCC certification application. They need to match up. The FCC and FEMA should closely coordinate on the preparation of facilities supporting that streamlined certification process. FEMA should issue that CAP conformity test guidance as quickly as possible, as noted before, and the FCC should continue the use of certified third-party test facilities for both Part 11 and CAP conformance testing for Part 11 and Part 2 Subpart J. Excuse me. Wrapping up our next steps. I'm sorry to rush through this quickly. We went through a 110-page FCC order. Try to move that to redact that to 18 slides of recommendations. Our next steps. We will continue to monitor the progress of CAP implementation at the national level. That's principally IPAWS and the Weather Service. The state level. And at this point, there are some 24 to 26 states that have some form of CAP or IP-based system deployed already. Whether or not that's in tandem with IPAWS remains to be seen, and local deployment. We'll continue to track issues in terms of network topology, capacity availability, security, and reliability of these networks. So in conclusion, on behalf of Chris and myself, I want to very much thank CISRIC and Jeff and the team for the opportunity for industry, all sides of industry, to take a look at these issues and examine them closely and come up with these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Have any questions or discussion? Ed's report? Yes, Bill.
Bill Smith. The only question I have is why the rule originally said that you couldn't do text-to-speech.
I think you probably have to defer that question to the FCC. There are a couple of footnotes. There's some 300 footnotes in the fifth report and order. One of them indicated concern over the consistency and the quality of text-to-speech. If they allow text-to-speech conversion at the originator source, like the National Weather Service do, that solves the consistency problem. It doesn't resolve potentially the quality problem. If you've got bad audio, bad text-to-voice conversion at the core, it'll be bad consistently through the network. We'll likely take an additional look at this. There are recommendations that we hadn't yet finished because of time in terms of text-to-speech quality and industry standards out there, like the WC3 guidelines on the SSML standards. But this is an issue we're wrestling with, quite frankly, and I think the federal agencies are also wrestling with it at this point.
Yes.
WTOP and WFED as the local primary and PEP stations for the National Capital Region would just like to speak in favor of this report, in particular the text-to-speech findings, and commend the working group on both the detail and the thoroughness of the report.
Thank you. Comments? Questions? If not, we'll assume, Ed, you're making the motion to accept the report. Do we have a second?
So moved.
No, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Any abstentions? Those of you on the phone, Jack?
Approved.
Craig?
Approved.
Barry?
Approved.
Elise?
Approved.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for another important report and work effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to the next group report. And again, these next reports will be status reports. No vote here, but we are forward to hearing them as well. The next working group 2, Next Generation Alerting, with Damon Penn and Scott Tellefson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Buckingham, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for National Continuity Programs in FEMA, and I'm filling in for Damon Penn and Scott Tollefson. Working Group 2 is responsible for making recommendations to the Council on actions that the FCC should take to promote deployment of next-generation alerting systems. Our assignment involves examining a wide range of issues and making recommendations on a number of policy issues. I'm waiting for the slide here. Our summary of the assignment consists of 2 areas, as you see identified on the slide. In performing this work, we will consider what actions the FCC should take to promote the development of next-generation alerting systems from 2 approaches. First, by possibly refining and extending the capabilities of the alerting systems that are being rolled out at the present time, such as the Emergency Alert System and the Commercial Mobile Alert System, or PLAN. And second, through pursuing entirely new capabilities and applications which are not contemplated by today's systems. And in this context, we will chiefly assess how Internet-based resources can be incorporated into alerting. Some relevant constituencies we are to look at include government and NGO alerting system operators, distribution platforms, receiving devices, content provider, and accessibility interest. On the slide, you can see examples of various platforms in each area. We currently have 42 members from a broad assortment of organizations that have roles to play in delivering alerts or that have unique concerns regarding receiving alerts. These 32 participating organizations include providers of commercial goods and services, government entities, and NGOs such as trade organizations and other advocacy groups. We are continuing to recruit members from social networking services, state and local governments that operate alerting services, hardware manufacturers, and leading providers of internet-based content. And if any of you have recommendations on people, we would appreciate that. We have held a series of all-hands activities conference calls for the working group since the first CISRIC meeting. In these calls, we have received overviews of the objectives and the structures of the national alerting systems and the status of those systems as they are being implemented. The majority of information shared and discussion between group members are held using a dedicated internet portal. We found that using the blogging capabilities of the portal have made our meetings much more efficient, especially when lengthy discussions about technical issues are needed. As we mentioned at the December meeting, we have formed 3 committees for carrying out key parts of our duties. The first committee, Architectures and Platforms, is chaired by Ed Zarnicki and Brian Rosen. Hassam Kassab has graciously agreed to augment Ed's efforts as he completes work as Vice Chair of Working Group 9. They are focused on developing recommendations on how various combinations of alerting architectures, distribution platforms, and end-user receiving devices may best present alerts to users. From this, they develop the 6 focus areas you see listed to organize their work. The second committee, Technical and Operational Criteria, is chaired by Ron Boyer and Brian Daly. This committee has taken the lead for developing recommendations regarding the criteria under which next-generation alerting participants can utilize the Internet and other broadband-based architectures. As you can see from their 5 focus areas, there is much work to be done to develop technical solutions and operational guidelines. The third committee, Social Media Alerting, is co-chaired by Dennis Gusty and Hisham Kassab. This committee had the most difficulty trying to narrow the focus of their task, but they emerged with the 5 areas you see. Their challenge is bridging the gap between what exists and what may emerge as social media evolves. They've also got the task of recommending how messaging is distributed and interpreted through social media. Dennis has held 2 major workshops, one here and one in California, that involve dozens of the nation's experts in social media. These produce a wealth of information and got the group off to a great start. As far as next steps, we will continue to seek members from additional organizations, as noted. We will continue to host full working group sessions each month going forward, and the committees are holding separate meetings. We are on track to meet our deliverable timeline for submitting final recommendations to the Council. Thank you for your interest, and we welcome your involvement as we proceed with our activities.
Thank you, Ann. Any discussion, any questions for Ann, comments? Okay. Thank you very much again, Ann. And we're going to wait just a moment. We have a esteemed visitor here coming our way, so we'll wait just a moment for our next report. I'm very pleased that Chairman Janikowski is able to join us today and appreciate the time he's taken out of his busy schedule to be here to discuss these important issues with us this morning. Mr. Chairman, we've heard a number of good reports this morning on cybersecurity and enhancement of 911, and we are encouraged by what we're hearing here. We believe that these reports are very important to cybersecurity, to securing the nation's critical infrastructure, protecting consumers, fighting crime, and protecting national security. Communications networks and customers who utilize these networks are the targets of thousands of cybersecurity events daily, from simple network defense probing to sophisticated harmful attacks. Communication providers are just one part of the cyber ecosystem, and our cybersecurity efforts are just one part of the comprehensive effort to address these issues. Technology and content providers, end users, owners and operators of critical infrastructure, and public-private partnerships all play a major role here. Over the last 10 years, the communication industry has worked extensively with industry peers, partners in government, and other stakeholders to strengthen the nation's collective defenses against cyber attacks. Public-private partnerships have yielded significant progress in the last few years by building a framework for collective defense and cooperation and helping to better understand cyber threats. Much of the necessary progress to improve the nation's cyber defenses will come from a continuing strong commitment to these partnerships and the activities that are currently underway. Continued cooperation between government and industry in this area is absolutely critical in my view. That said, we're entering into a new era of cybersecurity threats where adversaries have become more sophisticated, they've become more determined, and the need to step up our game collectively is more acute than ever before. I commend the industry and the respective those represented on this council for recognizing the importance of these voluntary initiatives and the continued willingness to work cooperatively to seek meaningful solutions. And I also appreciate the FCC happy to lead and support these efforts. Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the feedback. I do have to confess, I got caught up in the rumors that CISRIC was going to sign Peyton Manning. And then there was the talk of trading for Tim Tebow. But seriously, Tebow would rather be on CISRIC than the Jets. Glenn, first of all, thank you very much for taking on this task at CISRIC. Thanks to each of you for not only being here today, but being at a lot of other meetings and putting a tremendous amount of time and effort into this very important process. I just appreciate the public service that each of you signed up to do by being a member of this committee and taking it as seriously as you have. I know that these things don't work well if they don't get the support that they need from an agency like the FCC. And I do want to thank the FCC team that has worked so hard on this together with you, Admiral Jamie Barnett, who is right here, and Jeffrey Goldtharp and his team over there. Josh Gottheimer from my office is here somewhere. This has really been a tremendous amount of work. I thank everyone on the staff. And again, Glenn, to you, to the co-chairs of each of the subcommittees, committees, I'll come back to that. I just want you to know that this is the very best of how our country should work. People from the private industry, from the academy, from all sectors outside government saying, you know what, we have some problems and challenges as a country. Let's come together and see if we can work on some solutions. And so I thank you very much. I was pleased in this job to have the opportunity to charter this current version of CISRIC back in March of 2011. So that was last year. And the talent and expertise on this council is world class. Industry leaders representing a broad cross-section of the broadband economy, world-class engineers who both helped to develop the internet and who understand and are inventing the latest technologies on top of the latest trends, award-winning academics and thought leaders, and dedicated federal partners from across government. CISRIC works on a variety of topics. Glenn just mentioned some of them, ranging from next generation 911, of course, to cybersecurity. In fact, CISRIC has worked on developing solutions to cybersecurity challenges going all the way back to 2001. I don't know if there's anyone who's still on this committee who was there back in 2001. But in 2001, CISRIC was one of the very first groups, and quite possibly the first group, to develop, in fact, I'm looking at my notes, and it was the development of the government's first set of cybersecurity best practices. And so what you're doing today builds on a lot of excellent work that was done over the years by you and your predecessors. When we rechartered CISRIC last year, I tasked this panel with developing practical, concrete steps to reduce the threat of cyber attacks. And last month at the Bipartisan Policy Center, based on the work that CISRIC had been doing, I called for industry action on 3 specific cybersecurity challenges: botnets, internet route hijacking, and domain name fraud. Today, CISRIC and many industry players are answering this call to action. And so thank you again, Glenn, for these important CISRIC reports. To the chairs of each of the panels, Steve Crocker, Michael O'Riordan, Andy Ojilski, and Dr. Jen Rexford. I know you're all here. Thank you very much for your work, and again, thank you to each of the members of CISRIC and the panels. As all of you know very well, cyber attacks pose a very real threat, a critical threat to our economic future and our national security. To put the scale of this challenge in some perspective, and there's so much data that one can point to, but experts reported recently that the majority of all internet traffic is non-human, consisting of bots, automated spam, and hacking software. Now, there are basically 3 prime targets for cyber criminals, 3 categories to think about. The first is government-owned networks. The second is the networks that sustain vertical industries like financial services and our energy grid. And the third area is communications networks, private communications networks, wired and wireless, which are what most Americans are using every day to send emails, pay bills, and shop online. Our work together has been focused on that third important category. As the nation's expert agency on communications networks and technology, the FCC has always had as a fundamental part of our mission the security and reliability of communications networks. That's why we have a Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and why we're lucky to have someone like Admiral Jamie Barnett lead our effort. At the FCC, under the leadership of Admiral Barnett, we've taken steps to enhance the ability of small businesses, for example, to defend themselves against cyber attack. Over the last year, we've worked with external partners to create an easy-to-use tool, our Small Business Cyber Planner, to help small businesses develop a customized cyber plan and to understand the very basic things that they can do to help improve their security. You'd think everyone knows this, but of course they don't. Encrypt your Wi-Fi, have smart password policies. And so we're working hard with many of your companies, with the Chamber of Commerce, with the National Urban League, to get these basic best practices and this cyber planning tool to small businesses. That was very important, and we continue to work on it. The work of CISRIC that you're all here today for is the FCC's most significant effort yet to enhance cybersecurity. We called on you to develop cybersecurity solutions, real steps that will materially enhance our security, and to do it in a way that preserves the ingredients that have and will fuel the Internet's growth and success. That means solutions that preserve Internet freedom and the open architecture of the Internet, which have been essential to the Internet's success as an engine of innovation and economic growth. Privacy is a similarly vital principle, and while there are some who suggest that we should compromise privacy to enhance online security, that too is a false choice. Privacy and security are complementary, both essential to consumer confidence in the internet and to adoption of broadband. A third key component for problem solving in this area is the multi-stakeholder model. Solutions to cyber threats require the multiple stakeholders of the internet community to work together and develop practical solutions to secure our networks. The goal isn't regulation, the goal is solutions. And the history of the internet tells us that the multi-stakeholder model can produce solutions. It continues to be the best approach for securing our networks while preserving the internet as an open platform for innovation and communication. And so the reports that you have adopted today, this multi-stakeholder group, have identified smart, practical, voluntary solutions that are consistent with these principles that will materially improve our cybersecurity and bolster the broader cybersecurity endeavors of our federal partners. On botnets, thanks to your work, CISRIC has now developed a voluntary U.S. anti-bot code of conduct, the ABC, to reduce the threat of bots in residential broadband networks. The code includes steps to better detect bots in customer computers and to notify consumers when their computers have been infected. It includes steps to educate consumers so that users can look for signs that their computers are being used as bots. And it recommends making tools available to remediate bots. For example, customers of CenturyLink and Comcast can already go to those companies' websites and download a tool that will scrub your computer if it's infected by malware. On domain name fraud, CISRIC today endorses new steps toward implementing expert-designed security improvements to the domain name system, DNSSEC. In particular, CISRIC recommends that ISPs use DNSSEC to give their customers the ability to validate the services they use on the internet. For example, ISPs that implement CISRIC's recommendations will be providing customers with the means to verify the authenticity of websites they visit. On internet route hijacking, the report today calls on network operators to develop and adopt new technical standards that will secure internet routing. The standards would establish an authoritative registry that will enable ISPs to validate the authenticity of routing information, securing the foundations of trust between networks, which has been so essential to the internet's success. Again, I can't thank enough the CISRIC and its members who've developed these solutions. You've laid out a blueprint for addressing some of the biggest threats to our digital economy. Now, as all of you know, this town is littered with expert reports filled with smart recommendations that wind up at the bottom of a pile indefinitely. That's not at all what CISRIC has adopted today. Because not only has CISRIC laid out a concrete plan for action, many of your member companies are simultaneously making a commitment to act based on these recommendations. And I want to recognize the companies that have done so, that have already committed to implement the core recommendations of all three reports. You deserve a lot of credit for this. I'm going to mention each of your company's names, and I know there are people here from each of these companies, and I want you to each stand as I call your company's name. AT&T, CenturyLink, we know where CenturyLink is, Comcast, Cox, Sprint, Time Warner, and Verizon. And I'd like to acknowledge T-Mobile as well, which supports all three recommendations and will be implementing DNSSEC, which is the one that applies to them. Thank you all, and on behalf of the FCC and the American public, thank you for your commitments today. So as is clear, we're not just issuing reports today, although these reports are very important. We're talking about companies that serve more than 80% of the country's internet users already committing to these meaningful solutions to specific cybersecurity challenges. We expect that other companies will join in committing to implement these recommendations as well, and that CISRIC's voluntary cybersecurity measures will soon become standard operating procedures. These actions will have a significant positive impact on internet security. If you own a PC, you'll be significantly better protected against your computer being taken over by a bad actor. A bad actor could destroy your private files or steal your personal information. If you shop or bank online, you'll be significantly better protected against being directed to an illegitimate website and having your credit card number stolen. If you manage a business, you'll be significantly better protected against your internet traffic being misrouted, which would allow cyber criminals to steal valuable intellectual property. Implementing these recommendations will reduce the risks of cyber crimes that cost U.S. businesses and consumers billions of dollars every year and will enhance the security of this platform that is increasingly integrated into every aspect of our economy and society. Today's reports and commitments are a significant step forward, but as I'm sure Glenn and others have mentioned, there's still work to be done. These actions I've talked about will help tackle serious threats that exist now. The problems of botnets, domain name fraud, IP route hijacking will not go away if unaddressed. And meanwhile, technology continues to change, consumer behavior continues to change, and new cyber threats will evolve. The bad guys won't stop innovating. And that means the good guys can't stop innovating either. Indeed, we need to accelerate innovation, and we need to do so across all parts of the broadband ecosystem that have a stake in cybersecurity, including ISPs and search engines and designers of operating systems, security software developers. We need new ways to incentivize rapid innovation and cybersecurity protection. We also need to ensure that there are appropriate levels of R&D going into these issues. In addition to greater engagement from every segment of the broadband ecosystem and cybersecurity, there are additional steps that CISRIC can take, and I'm looking forward to working with CISRIC on these. Within today's recommendations, as you know, there can be multiple ways to take action. That's great, but we need to understand which solutions work best. And so I've tasked CISRIC with developing metrics to measure the effectiveness of cybersecurity solutions. And I've also asked CISRIC to ensure that all solutions being developed are consistent with consumer privacy. CISRIC's work today is significant. You've proven that you can come up with concrete solutions to concrete problems. You've established a process, a model process, and a set of principles for identifying problems in this area and tackling them. It fits very well into the set of important cybersecurity initiatives across government. And to talk about the administration's comprehensive efforts, we're fortunate to be joined by the Senior Director for Cybersecurity Policies on the National Security Council staff. Miriam Perlberg is here today. So let me thank you again for your tremendously important work and introduce Miriam Perlberg.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Janikowski, for inviting the White House to participate in this important and multi-tiered event today. First of all, I'd like to express Howard Schmidt, the President's Cybersecurity Coordinator's regret that he couldn't be with you today personally. He unfortunately had to leave the area quickly to attend a funeral. I am glad to be here in his stead. First, many thanks to our host, the Federal Communications Commission, for its guiding work through the CISRIC working groups and the public sector, private sector engagement. I'd especially like to commend Glenn Post, the CISRIC chairman. In your life as a CEO and president of CenturyLink, you bring not only command of your tradecraft, but also a lifetime of partnership in working with public, private, and academic sectors alike. Thank you so very much. This partnership extends to everybody in this room. As leaders on the CISRIC, you took on the mantle to address 3 cybersecurity issues: domain name system security extensions, DNSSEC, border gateway protocol, security, and botnet remediation. On behalf of the National Security Staff, I thank all of you for the hard work that you do each day as leaders in our cyber communities to secure our networks, to educate users, and to ensure cyber safeguards for all Americans. Your work contributes to the efforts that I want to discuss today. As an ever-increasing portion of our world's daily functions rely on digital systems, the importance of protecting the personal data we store on our computers, our mobile devices, and our networks increases each day. As President Obama highlighted in his joint statements with British Prime Minister David Cameron last week, the White House, our allies, and the entire United States government are focused on strategic initiatives to improve cybersecurity at all levels. In addressing the President's concern about cyber threats, I'd like to discuss my office's perspective and engagement with many of you in public-private partnership to enhance our nation's cybersecurity efforts, and I'm going to focus on the botnets. While risks on the Internet exist in many areas and continue to evolve, one increasingly exploited threat is the global rise of botnets. A botnet infection can lead to monitoring of a consumer's personal information and communications, and also to exploitation of that consumer's computing power and Internet access. Researchers suggest that an average of about 4 million new botnet infections occur each new month. Frustratingly, the vast majority of botnet attacks occur by using our own computers and our own computing resources to compromise our own infrastructure. This pervasive malware increases the price of doing business, places companies at a competitive disadvantage, threatens our individual privacy, and creates a significant drain on our economy. So it's great news that today we recognize the hard work of CISRIC Working Group 7. Their effort to develop a voluntary code of conduct for Internet service providers is one of the first steps to alert users whose computers are infected by botnets. Additionally, the code of conduct sets the stage for educating computers on the threat from botnets, on identifying and monitoring users when a botnet is active, or identifying and notifying users when a botnet is active, and working to remediate and to measure the extent to which botnets are prevalent in our systems so that we can know whether our strategies are working. We recognize that the issue of botnets, however, is larger than any one industry or country, and that's why partnership is so very important. That's why I'm very excited about the outreach efforts that many of you have undertaken to help the United States to understand this problem on your own, and also by learning from similar initiatives in Germany, in Japan, in Great Britain, and in Australia. Our collective coordinated initiatives are raising the cost for cyber criminals using botnets. Research on pay-per-install malware highlights that bots are already the most expensive to acquire in the U.S., in Canada, and in the United Kingdom, and that's a great trend. And that leads me to our relationship with our private and academic partners. Many in industry and in the private sector are already taking the lead by implementing their own infection notification systems. So it's fitting that last fall, as the FCC engaged the ISPs, the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology published the results of a request for comment for voluntary notification of consumers whose computers were infected by malware. Overwhelmingly, the response to Commerce's request highlighted the need for a multi-stakeholder approach, teaming ISPs with search engines and browsers, with Internet vendors, with privacy rights groups, with trade organizations to tackle botnets on all fronts. In December, Howard Schmidt, President Cybersecurity Coordinator, and Anish Chopra, then the President's Chief Technology Officer, met with the Departments of Commerce and Homeland Security and coordinated with the FCC to engage actively in a multi-stakeholder approach. Public sector group met with private sector partners. So many of you are very actively combating botnets and making the request to help identify industry best practices aimed at addressing the botnet challenge within a period of 90 days. As a result, just this month, a new industry botnet group comprising trade associations, companies, privacy groups, and safety organizations announced that it would begin work on a number of short-term goals to move forward on many of the ideas that were raised in response to the query from the Department of Commerce. Specifically, the Industry Botnet Group, known as the IBG, established 4 main goals: to develop high-level principles for addressing the botnets, to develop a strategy to increase public awareness on botnets and related malware that includes a focus on prevention and on remediation, to leverage available consumer-focused information tools and resources to prevent and remediate bot infections, and to identify and inventory measurement standards by collecting progress reports on the botnet environment, the effects of education, and the health of the ecosystem. So importantly, these goals draw on the expertise from the widest range of players, led by the private sector, only bringing in government to partner as needed on items like education, consumer privacy, and key safeguards. in harnessing the private sector's expertise and innovation, the support and stewardship of public partners, with the support and stewardship of public partners, the IBG's work builds on the accomplishments of the CISRIC and of the ISPs to further safeguard the ecosystem. In closing, let me highlight that the efforts of these groups will be discussed in detail at NIST's Botnet Work Group on May 30th at the Department of Commerce. Closing as I opened, cybersecurity is a shared partnership, and all of your organization's active role will help Internet consumers be more secure. By working to ensure that our users are more secure, we'll all be more secure. Thanks very much to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Perlberg. Appreciate your comments, and Mr. Chairman, appreciate your support of this group. I also appreciate your comments about Tim Tebow and the celebrations going on in New York. A little concerned I didn't hear any condolences for those of us who are New Orleans Saints fans. We lost our coach for a year and a lot of problems down there, but we'll recover, but I'm sure you'll offer those later on today. But I just want to say I appreciate the chairman being here, because the reason I'm here and the reason the people in this room are in this council, because we think we're part of something that can really be impactful and important to this country. And having you here and hearing your comments enforces that confidence that we are doing something that's worthwhile here. And there's been an amazing amount of work here done by these committees and the folks in this council and supporting folks, the FCC and others. And so it's important to us that it recognizes as important as it is, and we appreciate that very much, and that's why we're here. So thank you. We have also, I just want to say I appreciate Jamie and Jeff, their leadership and support throughout this process for this council. They've been excellent, and just want to recognize the work they've done here as well. We are scheduled for lunch, but we only have a couple more items to go, so we're going to take about a 10, maximum of 15. Let's be back by about 5 till 12, and we'll have a couple more sessions and then wrap up our meeting today. Thank you very much. With Working Group 8, E91 Best Practices, Robin Howard. Robin?
You should be on the phone.
Robin, are you on the phone?
Can you hear me, Glenn?
Yes, we can hear you, Robin, now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks for good afternoon, I guess. It's now lunchtime. There's a little bit of a delay in the live meeting versus the bridge, so I apologize in advance if I pause for a couple seconds between slides. So if you could go on to the second slide, I'm going to give an update on Working Group 8, E911 Best Practices. On this slide, we have the description of Working Group 8, which describes the work we're doing related to E911 best practices. Our working group has 2 deliverables, the first being the disaster best practices, which has final delivery during the June 6th council meeting. And our second deliverable will be on or before December 5th and covers the improvement of 911 related best practices and the creation of 2 new non-industry best practice categories for PSAPs and consumers. Next slide, please. Our E911 Disaster Best Practice Sub-Team, which has the June 6th deliverable, is co-chaired by myself and Lynn Deo of AT&T. This team has been provided a list of existing best practices that were compiled through an initial review of over 1,000 best practices. This team is chartered with taking a subset of these best practices and providing modifications for industry to follow when preparing for natural disasters. During this work, any gap that is found will be addressed as part of our work, and if necessary, new best practices will be drafted for Council's review. This team has members from across the industry and public safety segments to provide a cross-validation from both sides of the issues. During this work, the team will also provide recommendations as possible on how 911 traffic might be prioritized in such disaster situations. Next slide, please. Our current E911 best practice sub-team, which has a December 5th deliverable, is chaired by Mary Boyd of Entrado. This team has provided the bulk of the working group effort at this point by reviewing and categorizing the entire best practice data set, identifying in-scope and out-of-scope best practices, and setting the stage for the rest of the sub-teams. This team is currently working a set of current best practices, providing modifications, updating terminology, and in some cases may recommend the retirement of a best practice that is no longer valid. The team is also performing a gap analysis as they work through the best practices to identify any areas where new best practices need to be developed. As with the previous sub-team, this team has members from across the industry and public safety and is actively engaged on a weekly basis working through the deep dive of our best practices. Next slide, please. Our PSAP and Consumer Best Practice sub-team, which also has a December 5th deliverable, is chaired by Paul Stoffels of AT&T. This team has the challenge of creating 2 new best practice data sets to address and capture the experiences of public safety organizations and to provide consumers a standard set of recommendations on how to properly use 911 during critical times. The team recently received their best practice data set from the larger current 911 best practice sub-team, and work has started on this team. As part of this sub-team, the working group sought out and added expertise from several large public safety organizations to take advantage of their knowledge base related to PSAP and consumer educational activities. We've added Steve Souter from Fairfax County, Virginia, Elisa Simmons from Tarrant County, Texas 911 District, and Sonia Lopez Clausen from Harris County, Texas 911 District in recent months. Next slide, please. Our current work activities include a review of all 1,023 current best practices to identify the potential candidates for updates which defines the team's overall workload, identifying best practices that need modification versus those that can be simply included into the public safety best practice category as is without further modification, and a review of the past NRIC and CISRIC final reports to include, if possible, any recommendations for best practices that these focus and working groups have made previously, but the work to actually create that best practice or those best practices were not completed at the end of the charter. Next slide, please. Working Group 8 has completed our initial review of best practices and identified 729 that warrant further review as potential 911 related. The 3 sub-teams that I just talked about, their best practice workload was defined with the current 911 best practice team, where they defined the 729 best practices for review. And then the disaster best practice team has 545 best practices to review. And the PSAP and consumer best practice team has been provided with 578 best practices to scope out their workflow. In addition, the working group has been provided the Network Reliability Steering Committee training package for best practice creation, which will help ensure our best practices maintain the highest quality possible. Next slide, please. Okay, next steps for our working group is to continue our deep dive into the best practices and further define those that will meet our requirements, identify any gaps that may come to light during our work, and continue to work on our first deliverable for June of this year. At this time, I'd like to thank the Council for the time for me to provide an update today, and I'd also like to thank the Working Group 8 participants for their efforts thus far, and I look forward to continuing our work in this critical area. So that's the conclusion, and Glenn, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Robin, for that update. Open the floor for discussion at this time. Comments or questions for Robin on the report? Yes, Al.
Robin, this is Alan Paller from SANS. There is a challenge that all users have when they're given a list of 30 things to do, which is, which one do I have to do first? And when they're given a list of 100 things to do, it's what day will I read them? And when they're given a list of 500 things to do, it's where am I going to store that? Okay. So when we as an organization say to the world, these are best practices, I think our purpose is what the chairman said our purpose was, which is to measurably improve security. And my input to what you're saying is I think it would be helpful. There's one that we've been talking about something that was happening in Australia. There's another thing that happened in Australia, which is that they got tired of getting hit by these targeted attacks that hit Google and all these other guys, and they went and reverse engineered all of them and said, oh, there are 4 things, and if we do those 4 things, we'll stop them. And then the Secretary of Defense said, do it. And the first agencies that have done it have actually stopped them, and the ones who haven't done it haven't. So we've got these 4 controls out of Australia that are absolutely critical if you're trying to protect any kind of intellectual property or any other kinds of computers. What I'm suggesting is I think that if you're going to do best practices that you want the rest of us to say, great, it would be very helpful if you could contrast what you're doing with what the Australians found, with what the British have just nationally adopted, the 20 critical controls, with the 853 things, sort of give us a context so that we know what we're recommending to people are actually the most important things in that order that they need to do to protect their systems so that they can get on with the job.
Okay, and that's fair. And what I would say is that I'll go back with our team and we will look at those and really best practices to. You mentioned something about storage. The storage at this point we'll be working with ADIS and also the FCC. There's dual sites where these best practices will be kept. Best practices are also broken up by 3 levels of criticality, so that if, like you say, you want to go look at the most important ones, those will be marked, and then you can look at the next set and the next set as you go down. But we're willing to take that input and look at it in the bigger scope of the team. One thing with best practices, especially in the industry world, is that we have to ensure that at least one company is utilizing that particular best practice in order for it to actually meet best practice criteria. So, but I think it's always healthy to take those things that you mentioned and bring those into the team and see if we can build any synergy off of those.
Great.
Other questions, comments for Robin? Okay, Robin, thank you very much for that report.
Right. Thank you, Glenn.
We'll go to Working Group 10, 911 prioritization with Gina Green and Sarah Bradshaw.
It's a little narrow up here. Hi, I'm Sarah Bradshaw. I have to tell you, coming from the state of Hawaii, I'm executive director of 911. Our legislative session is underway. Everyone is in aloha shirts and sundresses. So I had to stop in L.A., where I'm based out of, to pick up a suit and shoes that have toes covered. With that said, Gina Green is going to give you kind of a what's been done so far, but I'm going to do a quick overview. Being last, following all of you who have done so much work already, and us getting started when Jeff and Lauren gave me a Christmas present in December, we're just getting organized. So we don't have a lot to report, but this working group is about 911 prioritization, and we're looking at ways to ensure that 911 is available during natural disasters and surges in the network. There's a lot of considerations for 911 traffic, both on the service provider and network ends, as well as on the 911 public safety answering point ends. And in terms of reducing traffic, the group has even looked at some alternatives, like communities have implemented 311, like Los Angeles has, City of New York, as well as Chicago and others. So there may be some other things that are actually going to unfold in this work group besides just looking at network surges. And I do know that this is a hot topic, and I know that it has tremendous challenges for everyone all the way around. So we're well aware of that, as well as the impacts it has on people's lives when they're trying to get through to 911. So all of those alternatives will be considered. Due to our late start, we were given the a challenge of meeting the date of March in 2013 for a full report to come to before all of you. We have identified our working group members who have all been now vetted, and I was on a recruiting mission when we came here, and thanks to a couple of people who have stepped up and volunteered, we'll be submitting a couple more names, Jeff, to you and to Lauren, and a couple of members are already vetted. So we can go right to work. So I was really, really pleased at that. I really want to thank the members of the working group and team. We're small but mighty, and we are looking for some more strength, particularly on the 911 operations and public safety side, and some of the other venues like Satellite that can participate with us. So we have all considerations for all venues and all different technologies. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed co-chair, Gina Green.
Thanks, Sarah. As she said, we've just really gotten started. We've had one meeting so far. We were supposed to have one this afternoon, which we canceled. That will, pick up. She put up the list of our current participants, a very good list, a lot of really good technology-based people who have some insight into what we need to do. The group is going to look at, and we talked about our initial objectives off of our mission statement, to look at what's actually technologically feasible today, what would be feasible in the 4G environment as well as 3G and previous, what considerations we have for enhanced 911 as well as future for next gen 911, and not only looking at is it technologically feasible today or with the technology tomorrow, but is it realistic just because we can do it? How do we do it? And how do we determine who gets priority and when, based on national disasters? So we're looking forward to the challenge. We are just getting started, and hopefully in the future we'll have some really good status reports for you. And that's all I have.
Gina. Sarah, we'll open up for the discussion. Questions or comments? Bill, you have anything? Nope. Thanks. All right. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Gina and Sarah, thank you very much for that good report. I know you're just getting started on that. We look forward to hearing more on your work. Again, I want to thank all of you for your time, focused attention, commitment to this process. I really believe our efforts will have a lasting impact on national safety, on national security. I think we're doing work that will impact this country for years ahead. So thank you for your attention to this, the hard work. I'm glad to be a part of this. And before we, just one comment on our next meeting, scheduled for June 6th at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. in this meeting room. So again, June the 6th back here. With that, I'll turn the meeting back over to Jeff to close out.
Before I close, let me just turn it over to Jamie real quick.
And only for the purpose of one additional thank you for all the work that went into the CISRIC members and to the working groups, all the expertise that went into. Glenn, for your leadership. The meeting went amazingly smoothly and quickly. I'm glad we're getting out of here in time to get everybody to lunch. And to somewhat paraphrase John F. Kennedy, I think that any person looking back on cybersecurity in the first part of the 21st century can say with pride, I served on CISRIC 3 or its working groups, because I really do think that you've made tremendous advances here. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamie, and been my pleasure too to work with all of you, and I want to add my thanks. I'm looking forward to working with you over in the months to come, and I hope you all really have a chance to get out and wander around the tidal basin and see what DC has to offer this year. It's really nice down there. And I haven't been outside much today, but I think it might be a nice day. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Please have a safe trip home, and I look forward to seeing you back here.